Yeah, so I think today we're going to stray away from absolutes on certain topics, and yeah, yeah. There's a lot of debate when it comes to inventions, and actually with several of our inventions today or innovations, there's debate about well, who actually created it? Who, it's like baklava. Everyone in the wet Eastern Mediterranean and kind of Black Sea area claims they invented baklava when the reality is that it probably has been around for longer than anyone wants to admit before any modern nationalities even existed. Anyway, so yeah, today we are focusing on the 15th century, 14th and 15th century, because, most people know what happened, in the 1350s, 1340s, 1350s in Europe was the Black Death, and it was devastating, and it killed probably 50% of the population in a period of about 3 or 4 years, which is shocking for any society and was devastating on an economic level. Ireland, it's funny, no one ever talks about the death toll in Ireland, but maybe the population was less dense, so it was less devastating there.
So what happened in Ireland is, and this a lot of this work is actually done by Finn Dwyer. Finn Dwyer has his book on the Black Death. Absolutely magnificent book. Even if you're just into the Black Death, get Finn Dwyer's Black Death. It is an absolutely magnificent book. Anyway, in Finn Dwyer's book, he talks about how the Black Death went in and it completely devastates the English Norman settlements of Waterford, Dublin, Cork. These areas are completely washed away.
Mm-hmm.
And the people that need to quickly fill in the gaps. So what happens is because these settlements are run by these kind of Irish, Anglo, Norman kind of it's a whole different cultures at this point going into 1350 because they're all in the very cramped villages. And there's a lot of myself and Rachel were talking about this a few weeks back. I think about a month ago now, Rachel, I believe.
God, no
About
kidding.
jokes about sometimes get so or saying that they need a fair market to work around their lives,
Right.
make sure this is fair. Dublin has any similarity to that going on. In fact, it gets to a point where when people are siege in Dublin, they're constantly trying to find an opening in the house just slightly poking up from the wall to try to set fire to it.
Right.
So they burn most of Dublin down. That's how cramped some of these settlements are. So of course, when the Black Death comes out, it just completely wipes out. Dublin is heavily affected. Kilkenny is heavily affected. Cork River heavily affected. Areas that are not affected, Gaelic areas. The Gaelic, the native Irish, are living more in the deep, what is it, the more kind of central areas, more kind of burger areas where you've got roundhouses, nice little bar around it. Then you've got North Plus. Most of these communities, as we are largely decentralistic communities that have assembled basically the language, but they're not cramped into urban settlements that you see down in the English controlled areas, which is referred to as the home world development.
Right.
And because of this, our flows, these alleged English words, the original Normans that came into the world control back in 1169, these words now have to work for the local population. So that means it's very cultural people from the countryside, which in France are referring to as peasants.
Right.
These native Gaelic people now have to fill in for the original French, French, English, Cameron, Welsh people, and all these people that came in and occupied all of these settlements, they're now being replaced by very Gaelic country people that are coming into these settlements now and
Right.
starting to take over all these settlements. And so what happens is that we now have the Anglo-Irish people, we have a people that are a mix of both English and Irish, and of course even more English people coming in to take those jobs. Even those more English people that are coming in after the Black Death, they kind of like Irish culture, they like the Irish language, they like the Irish prescriptive life, they like the English, they say the Irish children. So these new English people that are coming in to get back into Dublin, Waterford, Cork, and many local Irish people, they kind of like their Irish ways.
Right.
And it was Lionel of Antwerp. He doesn't like to sing, by the way. He really does not like to sing. So he goes to Kilkenny, I think it was 1366, with these statutes of parents, as he's referring to us, and one of my questions is still the fate. I have to bring my voice up. Give us one moment there, and I will bring that up again. How was this now? Are you guys finding my voice now?
I wonder.
If you guys are, you can hear me.
Yeah.
If it's just slightly faint, I might play along with the statutes of Kilkenny. But yeah, the statutes of Kilkenny were laws that were passed in Parliament in 1366, and they were meant to divide. It was meant to make, in against the law for English people, English women, English men, to marry local Gaelic people, which is insane, given that Gaelic people live in Kilkenny, were Lionel of Antwerp for most of the time. He lives off in England, London, or he lives up in his big mansion in Dublin. So it's quite difficult for Lionel to enforce these rules, especially towards these now Anglo-Irish lords and common Anglo-Irish people. It's very difficult for Lionel to enforce all these rules. And eventually, because these rules are stupid and he's trying to enforce these rules, and also at the same time, after the Black Death, Richard II takes over, and he's trying to enforce all these high taxes into Ireland.
Right.
He does the same thing in England, and enforces the peasants' revolt. In Ireland, he causes the Gaelic resurgence, which is organised by another man who's very frustrated about all these new laws into the country, which is because he has a Gaelic native Irish person that's married an English woman,
Right.
Elizabeth Devon. So he's making war. Richard II, he's not happy about this. He had marriage break in Ireland, and so he invades Ireland, and he's over 1394 and 1399, and he's not successful.
Okay, in the wake of all of that death, did that lead to, because what happens everywhere else in Europe is that whereas you had serfs before, they're basically in most places serfdom vanishes because the lords vanish and there are not enough people to actually do the work, so they actually have to start paying people an actual wage. That happens pretty much uniformly across the mainland. Did that happen in Ireland as well, where you had serfs before, suddenly now you've got laborers who actually have to be paid a wage?
I would assume so massively, especially towards the Gaelic, because the native Irish, they were not allowed to work within the settlements before, but now you have them inside the settlements that they are hired and stuff. So even when Lionel of Antwerp comes into the country around 1366, that's what he sees. So there is a massive change in the whole serfdom and the removal of serfdom and stuff. It's a bigger change in Ireland because those serfs, the people who are forced into the countryside to work in the fields and stuff, they're the names, like the names are the worst classes in these settlements and stuff.
Right.
And now suddenly these roles are cheaper to bring against the local Gaelic people that are coming in to take the top level jobs and stuff in finance trade. Even in government and stuff, you have to work with local Gaelic people.
Right.
It's something that Richard II eventually starts to understand in 1399 and 1394. Lionel of Antwerp, even when he was down, just didn't understand this. The savages got him, so the savage lot of men, the Bubonic Plague is the savage lot of people.
Right.
Civilized.
Yeah, humans really like othering. It's just a thing we do. So one of the things that happens when you have a shortage of manpower, and this, you observe, this is a cycle that gets observed across all of human history. If you have a surfeit of people, if you have too many people, then you generally, labor is cheap and there's no need for innovation because you have humans to literally do menial tasks. But when 50% of your population dies in one fell swoop, suddenly you have to get creative as a society about accomplishing the same work with fewer people. And that's when you get real innovation, right? Most people don't know, ancient Greece had automated machinery. There was the inventor Heron, and he invented all of these amazing machines, but they were just party tricks because he was Athenian and they had slaves. So the machines weren't actually ever used to innovate. They were just used to entertain people. So that's why people say, the ancient world kind of stopped because there was a slave population in terms of technology. There was no need for technology. But here we are. It's the 1360s and decades, and there's just not enough people. So we've got some really fun innovations that maybe existed before the Black Death, but after the Black Death, they became crucial crucial innovations, technology to the functioning of and development of society. So the first thing we're going to talk about today is something that actually crops up a lot when you're wandering around in Kingdom Come Deliverance in Bohemia. Windmills. Now, most modern people don't realize windmills aren't just scenic, decorative elements in the Dutch countryside. They're actually functioning. But in the Netherlands, people don't realize the windmills in the Netherlands aren't necessarily to grind grain. They're actually there to drain the land so that they can actually farm that land. Those are polders that would normally be under sea level and filled with brackish water. And those mills were actually pumps. They pumped the water out. But not in Bohemia in this era. So this windmill I thought was interesting. It looks a little ragged. And I'm thinking, come on, guys, you can do better maintenance on this. Just because it's the 1400 doesn't mean people didn't like to have nice things. But what was interesting when I started digging around into what medieval windmills looked like in Eastern Europe, look at that one on the left. Does that look familiar?
Yeah. It's bang on.
It's bang on, isn't it? So that is actually a windmill from Poland that was built in the 1590s. It's an extant one. And it's part of an outdoor museum. And, in my opinion, Poland, similar conditions, similar environment to Bohemia in this era. So I'm not mad with them using this as their model, even though it's about 200 years later. But it's better than just using a modern one.
What's very interesting that you actually bring that up is that the developers of Kingdom Come going into Kingdom Come 2, they're arguing because I don't know what sources of historians, and I think maybe you would probably either reinforce this or probably go completely against this, Rachel, because you know much more about this topic than I do. Is that the developers of Kingdom Come 2 were arguing, because of allegedly historians had told them, that there's a massive influence coming in from, much more earlier on, they obviously in the 13th century had the Teutonic campaign going on with Lithuania, Poland, and Prussia. And a lot of those influences have started to come down from the Teutonic campaign up in the 13th century and have started to make their way down to Bohemia, into the Holy Roman Empire and stuff. So perhaps that's further influences coming down from the Poland and stuff, making their way down into Bohemia and that. Maybe that's why the developers probably saw this and were thinking, actually maybe there's finds in Bohemia that fits in and stuff, or maybe there's a lack of finds and we could just use that.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what's going on.
I expect it was a lack of finds. I mean, so I complained to you about this as well. The iconoclasm that results from the Hussites means that there is definitely not as much visual evidence for medieval Bohemia as there should be by rights. Because Bohemia, which by the way, that's the Germanic name for it. But Bohemia was, culturally rich. Lots of artists, lots of sculptors. There were Bohemian artists and sculptors were going out into Europe, into Italy, into Germany, making their way into France and working for the courts. So there should, by all rights, be a rich artistic heritage. And relative to other places, it's so limited. So I had problems. I dug hard, and I couldn't find any imagery of windmills from Bohemia in this era. So I think probably developers said, well, 1590 is good enough. And also the commentary that I found under this windmill here is that windmill technology didn't change very much, from the Middle Ages going forward. And I'm like, I hate it when people say things like that. Honestly, it makes me, it makes my oppositional defiance rise to the fore because it's just generally not true.
I'm going to massively disagree on that one because Ireland in the early medieval period with the monastic settlements, as
Mm-hmm.
starting to appear left, right, and centre. And there's a lot of development there. They can see, because we've actually found some people have found some of these worm mills in Ireland, and there's definitely development. Yeah, exactly. There's trial and error. We can actually see that with archaeological finds in Ireland, that there is trial and error going on, that we've gotten this technology. Most likely we probably got the technology in with the Romans in around 410, and then going into the 6th century, you can see trial and error. You can see the Irish going, okay, we saw the Romans doing this, how can we do this? And you can see that development in the monastic settlements, where there's a lack of people with the priests and stuff trying to put this, not priests, clergy, trying to put this thing together and go, okay, well that didn't work, we'll try this, we'll try that. So there's definitely development going on there. So I would have to disagree with that.
I mean, I never. Yes, there are times where maybe architectural features don't change for a couple of hundred years. People just kind of stick with what they've always had. That is true. It does happen. I just don't like the assumption that we don't have any imagery, so we just assume that it didn't change. How about you just admit you don't have any imagery, and this is the earliest one you could find? Like that's a better statement. But what a lot of people don't understand about windmills is that it's automation, right? It's the ultimate in eco power, because they're used in Eastern Europe. The wind power is used primarily to grind grain, and I mean in Ireland too. God, you've got so much wind, especially on the coast, that there's no way that they weren't using windmills to grind their grain.
The windmill side of it, I would have to ask you to about definitely. We definitely do have a lot of water mills. Water mills is a ton of it. As I was saying there, there's a whole development in the early medieval period with the monastic settlements of water mills. Windmills, I'm not really sure, but as you said there, in present day Ireland, a lot of windmills in Ireland. There's a lot of windmills. We've got that, beautiful, beautiful image of the Cliff of Moher, which is the very edge of Ireland in Clare. And then way in the background, you've got these beautiful windmills just working away. So even the imagery that you would get in Ireland, the beautiful green grass,
Right.
Dark green grass is absolutely magnificent and beautiful. And then the beautiful cliffs with these beautiful windmills, and everything's nice, warm and dry. So Ireland even has that same imagery that's definitely inspired by the Dutch countryside.
Right.
So I think the Dutch like that imagery as well, of their windmills, the beautiful
Yeah.
daffodils and that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, they do their tulips. So we have a question. Good question actually. It's a valid one for us historians. Can we blame the absence of Bohemian windmills on the world wars? Well, I mean, that is kind of my go-to for why there are no more anything left in Europe. Take War X, and it probably destroyed something. Yeah, I mean, if it wasn't the 30 Years' War, because let's be honest, the 30 Years' War for this part of Europe was absolutely devastating, and wooden structures, they're going to burn. I would say maybe not necessarily just the World Wars. It could be, the 30 Years' War, the Spanish War for Succession, the Napoleonic War.
Oh God!
You've got. Right. Right. Yeah, so basically anytime there's a lack of architecture for a specific period, it's a war, yeah. And could be world wars, but I bet they didn't make it to the world wars, these wooden windmills. Yeah. And
I could easily imagine all that.
I mean, and how often they were so bad about gunpowder storage, right? So how often things blew up just because I could see them using these windmills as, temporary gunpowder storage, and boom. I mean, that happened so often. Look at the Acropolis.
I
um,
have to, like, yeah, maybe that's definitely something I'll have to look into next time I talk to Jack about reactor. I'll have the program plan to see if they're using windmills
right.
to store gunpowder and stuff. Yeah,
So,
oh god, it's terrible.
so one of the things that well, not modern windmills, historical windmills that are no longer actually being used as such don't have anymore, but you can see on the right here, um, are the sails. So those wooden frames, those are frames. They don't really blow very efficiently on their own. Those are actually sails. So you're supposed to put, you know, a sail on each of those blades, and you can see in the one from Suffolk, um, and this is very likely how they probably looked in Ireland as well, because you've got similar building materials. Those there would be no holes in the frame. You would have white sails, so it would be extra beautiful, right? You'd have these beautiful white tan colored sails, kind of turning placidly or not so placidly in the field, grinding your grain to make your bread so you can get fat. Um,
Nice.
okay,
I need to
so
get fat in the medieval period.
so automation, power, using eco power. We can learn a lot of lessons from our medieval ancestors. You talked about water mills. Water mills, like you said, have been around since, I think the Babylonians actually had water mills. The idea of using water, the flow of water to drive things, is not new. And I even found an instance. It was in Ireland, yeah. Ireland, they actually, in the 14th century, had a tidal water mill. So they actually used the
Nice.
power of the tides to drive the water mill, which is a concept we're using now also to generate electricity. So that's pretty awesome. Um, and the idea of using this natural power to take the place of manpower, because otherwise, before there were windmills, um, you might have had a donkey mill, and they still have those in Korea. I've actually, not that they're still being used, but you can go visit them at the folk museums, right? Where a donkey would walk around on a track, or an ox or something, and sort of pull the grinding stone all the way around. Uh, but then you have to feed that animal. So that's not as efficient as just using the wind.
Yeah, this sounds way more way, way, way better. I haven't seen any of that in Kingdom Come. As you, the earlier examples that you were using, that's pretty much what we're seeing in Bohemia in the video game. Is either being used by water or used by wind itself. So yeah, the examples they have are actually bang on perfect.
Yeah, so then we also have, just wanted to show, so this is actually an extant 14th century watermill in England. So people can get an idea of what the interior of these places, and you can still buy freshly milled flour milled from this mill using the power of water, which I think is pretty cool.
Wow.
I
Yeah,
assume,
that's really awesome. That's in the UK.
yeah, Lyme Regis. So,
Mm.
yeah, Royal Regis, or Royal Lime, I guess is how that would actually translate. Yeah, so there are still these mills were so well built in the Middle Ages that they're still operating. I can't imagine anything we've built in the last 20 years still being in operation in 700 years. I really can't.
There's Roman roads built in England. England, its ground is very difficult because it's always moving up and down and stuff, and yet the Roman roads still stand.
Still
But
there.
modern English roads are just crumbling and falling apart. Like, they have to be maintained at least, I think it's every few months. They have to be
Right,
maintained,
right.
or they just completely fall apart. And cars, one time, my word, this is very Irish, this isn't it, but one time when driving around the country, just like my mom's car got stuck into a pothole in Ireland. That's how terrible the roads are but in Ireland. So yeah, it's absolutely fascinating that the Roman roads today still are perfect condition. Like, so
Right.
what are we doing wrong in this world?
We are using what is called false economy. Instead of building it super well at the outset and investing a lot of money in it, we invest way more money into it over a longer time, because that makes sense. Back to the comments. I have a feeling that the innovations between 1200 and 1500 were in terms of the fineness of the gears and the shapes of the blades, so that at a distance most laymen would not notice the difference. Yeah, I would agree with that, and also one of the big changes is that the incidence of their use increases after the Black Death. And then the next, Susan says, so we're blaming the short Frenchman Napoleon or the 1600s Bohemian Wars on the loss of everything? No, I'm blaming all the wars. Every war.
Yeah, I'd have to do the same as well. Like, any war where somebody's trying to completely erase the history of one group of people and kind of replace with their own, but then or maybe you just open up a whole new can of worms there.
The reality is that things burn in warfare, in this time especially. You've got bands roving the countryside, and things just accidentally get set on fire sometimes. And and also of course, a war of attrition is best fought by removing people's ability to feed themselves. One. So if you burn the mills down, people have a much harder time grinding grain to actually make bread, which of course at this time bread was a staple for the majority of the population. So I could easily see actually the mills having been intentionally burned down as part of an attempt to starve the population into submission. So, yeah. Moving. Yeah, it's in the modern world, it's for Westerners anyway. It's hard to imagine not having enough food just sitting around, right? But the medieval ecosystem was much more fragile than the modern food ecosystem is. Other mills that are actually driven by water, more water power. Most people don't realize they had hammer mills in the Middle Ages, trip hammers, and blacksmiths started using these. That's a paper mill. Sorry, started using these hammer mills to actually be able to forge metal and shape metal on a faster and more massive scale. So everyone pictures the blacksmith sitting there hammering, or maybe 3 blacksmiths sitting there hammering. But the reality is that most things were probably not hammered by hand. The initial stages were probably, a lot of the grunt work was done by these water-driven trip hammers.
I haven't seen one of those quite yet in Kingdom Come, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see this in Kingdom Come 2. Because anytime I've gone around the armory or blacksmiths in Kingdom Come, so far I've only seen the traditional way of bang, 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 bang. But we do see a lot of the windmills and the water mills and stuff using this kind of doof, doof, doof. Especially if we go over to the silver mines and stuff, we can see this kind of machinery and stuff working on the silver mines.
Right.
So I can imagine later on, especially Kingdom Come 2, coming across this weird device and me scratching my head going, how does this work?
Yeah, it's the second you're using automation like this to replace human, to replace people who are no longer there because they're dead due to the plague, you increase your output, you increase your productivity, and it's innovations like this that really that make it easier for gunpowder to become ascendant, because it's easier to forge things made of metal when you have power doing it for you. Okay, checking the comments, nothing yet in the comments. So, then paper. So, paper, wow. Modern, a lot of people these days just assume that paper has been around forever and that everyone always had paper, and, that's the way it is. But that's not true, is it?
No, it's not. We're going to have 2 massive revolutions when it comes down to paper. Obviously, we're completely aware of the revolution that we're having. Going to have in Europe. Anybody who's into their Tudor history or the reforms or any of that kind of stuff may be slightly aware of the revolution that we're having in Europe. And what's very strange is in Kingdom Come Deliverance, which is set in 1403, when I actually typed in paper revolution and stuff, I see that China, interesting enough, is having a how would you say this now, kind of
Readoption.
resurgence
Yeah.
of paper. You're covering it right there. With the Ming Dynasty has wrestled control away from their rivals, in particular the Mongolian branches, and they've taken the crown now. Is it crown? Crown being a word for the Chinese? With their empress.
Throne. I would say the throne.
They've taken control of
Yeah.
China. And they've reintroduced a massive resurgence of paper in China, in particular paper running, which I thought was absolutely fascinating that they're happening exactly the same time as we're having all these events happening in Bohemia and in France in the 100 Years' War, of course, and the resurgence and stuff that we're seeing. The Ming Dynasty in China, they're having this massive, kind of, I suppose, a renaissance going on.
They are. No, and you know, it's really fascinating because it's happening in Korea too. So in Korea, you have Sejong the Great, this great philosopher, scientist, king who comes and just all these social reforms, and he invents all sorts of amazing machinery, including the Korean alphabet, by the way. And he believes in egalitarianism and justice, and you know, in China, they've got the voyage of discovery. You know, they send out this massive fleet of ships that go to Africa, that go to Indonesia, that maybe even made it to the Americas. And you know, there's meanwhile in Europe, you know, we've got this birth of rebirth. I hate to use the word rebirth because it makes it sound like one day everything was all bright and shining. That's not how it went. But you've got this shifting ethos. You've got this, because of the Black Death, you have this resurgence of innovation and ideas and new ideas that people are considering because, you know, this tragic, traumatic thing happened and made everyone reconsider. So it is fascinating how that seems to be happening all across Eurasia. But then I think about it more closely. The Black Death hit all of Eurasia. So maybe it's not so amazing. Maybe it was bound to happen.
That's quite interesting. But I definitely think the Black Death helped encourage it because we had the Mongolians who dominated China for a while. And I think eventually someone was going to undermine the whole system and then try to put the pieces back together again. And maybe it was just the fact that the Black Death had gone in for it.
Exactly.
The Black Death had undermined society and for those cracks that we really take advantage of, not just in China, but maybe in Ireland as well. Maybe those opportunities wouldn't have existed if it wasn't for the Black Death, perhaps. To be honest with you, China's not real time my favorite expertise. So I would absolutely love to see what the comment section would have to say about that.
Yeah. Share your knowledge, people. I'm very knowledgeable about Korean history, minimally knowledgeable about Chinese history, more than the average American, but still, God, no, not an expert. But you know, paper is paper making is a fascinating topic because modern paper is made from wood pulp mostly, but medieval paper wasn't. Do you know what medieval paper was made from, Philip?
Well, in Ireland, we were actually using household as a form of paper, but for the continent of Europe, I'm not quite sure. You'd have to correct me.
So there's parchment and there's paper, and they're not the same thing. So of course, everyone in Europe was using hides, vellum, for a long time, but paper was actually invented in China and kind of made its way. It was invented in China in like the 3rd century BC. And then it made its way eastward. But paper was made from linen rags and cotton rags. So it's actually made from cloth. And so if you see these hammers in this paper mill, the hammers that are driven by water, because of this innovation of using water to power machinery, those hammers literally pulverize the rags into pulp. And then you use that pulp to make your paper. So medieval paper is not like modern paper. It's very durable. It actually lasts much, much longer. Because modern paper, you know, it cracks and disintegrates pretty quickly. But here on the left in this picture, this is one of the hundreds upon hundreds of letters written by the Paston family. And it's written on paper, not vellum. And so vellum is, of course, animal skin. It is a writing surface made from animal hide. Could be cow, could be sheep, could be lamb. There was even deer skin vellum. This is paper though, and this is made from linen, and it has, you can see it's got water stains all over it. This letter has not had a good life, but it has still survived almost 700 years. So, yeah, right? So medieval paper was super durable, even though they didn't look at it that way. They looked, anything written on paper wasn't meant to survive. Because by the 15th century, they were viewing paper as the temporary medium, and if you wanted something to be permanent, you used vellum. So the Pastons thought, well, these are just silly. This is correspondence. It's not important. No one will care about our letters going forward. But here we have them. They've survived, and this one has survived flooding, apparently, maybe some fire. Yeah. So that medieval paper was made from cloth, not from wood pulp, which made it a completely different beast to modern paper. Comment with.
That's obviously really fascinating.
With the increase in paper production, could we posit an increase in the reading population? Haha. Yes. Yes, vellum was expensive for many reasons. One, you literally, as Philip said, you have to take an animal hide, right? Animals are not cheap. And it takes a lot of labor to create a hide. You have to scrape the hide to get all the flesh off, and then you have to stretch it, and you have to scrape it, and it takes a lot of treatment, and it takes a long time to cure, and then you have to even it out, and so there's more scraping process. It's a process making vellum. I've actually helped make vellum, and it's not easy. So books used to be literally $1 million items, but with paper, which can be mass produced using these paper mills, you've got a much more affordable medium. So paper making its way to Europe and then being mechanized through the paper mill, and then combine that with the Gutenberg movable type printing press, it's the perfect storm. Yeah. So I definitely think that had a big role in increasing literacy. Yeah.
Yeah. We kind of see the advancement, weirdly enough, in Ireland in 1641. You have so many people sort of given paper, and they're told to report rebellions in the area in 1641 with the War of the Three Kingdoms. And so you have all these people who they can't really read or write properly, but they're trying to put together words.
Right.
And the English is butchering. Like it's literally them trying to. They've never. You can tell by the way they're writing all the stuff that they've never been told how to read or write, and they're trying to guess how these words work and stuff. And even what's crazy as well is that in 1631 we have people working up and they're trying to write reports and stuff. But a year before that, we had all these reports coming up of rebellions, and also anti-rebellions like be faithful to the king. So you have a picture, and this is what happens to traitors. And under it, you actually have writing, and people used to be there with the likes of galleries and just scratching their head trying to put together these words and stuff in English as well. And also, we also have these pictures coming up, and they have the religious reaper pictures as well. But now these new religious ideas that people are printing, putting into writing, and then posting it up, and people once again scratching their head trying to put this together and stuff. So it definitely, people are amazing at literature and stuff. It was starting to kind of evolve literature within a lot of these local communities and stuff that had never seen these pictures before. Just like,
yeah, the broadsides.
Certain places that the locals scratching their head going, what's this? Because before that, from my interpretation of the literature and stuff, it seems like we mostly were dealing with pictures. It was very picture oriented, where they would go into a church and they would see, the picture of Jesus and stuff,
Right.
and then they would see the symbols. And most of their reading was very symbol based. They were looking at the various religious symbols, and they were able to put together
The story, right.
Jesus and his apostles and all this stuff. Right now, we have a picture where they're doing various, saying, they're pointing to the children and stuff, and they're saying, they're basically hinting this is what happens to children, and then there's writing under it, so people are able to look at that, the symbols in it, and they
Right.
And that may how they were put together the literature. So I'm talking about violence, it's definitely promoting literature in the local societies.
Yeah, for certain. When materials become affordable, then suddenly it becomes a mass adopted practice. So there's another question. It's a good one. So is that where we get the term rag? Actually, I can't. Unfortunately, there's a stupid. Sorry, I've got a stupid heart right over that last word. So I'm going to have to just. I can't actually see.
I think it's rag content for paper.
Ah, right. So is that where we get the rag?
Is where we get the rag content for paper.
Yes. Yes, that is exactly right. So this is actually paper is one of the reasons we sadly don't have many extant garments from medieval Europe, because especially linen garments, because linen could be turned into paper. So, we might have extant wool garments that kind of crop up in the walls of buildings as insulation. Not so much for linen, because why would you put the linen in your walls when you can sell it to the paper maker to make paper? So, yeah, that's for us fashion historians, we have a mixed relationship with rag paper, with medieval paper. That's a love-hate situation.
Yeah, that would definitely do it right.
Okay, other innovations that are pretty massive for the world, spectacles.
Spectacles. Yeah, I was, it was 2 days ago I first seen this, and I'm not sure if this is a photo you guys saw last night, or if it was already sent out to you, but it kind of got me out. I was kind of going through doing my research and stuff, and I saw the spectacle photos, and I was like, this is back in the medieval period.
Oh yeah. So first off, are these screenshots? They look almost nicer than. This is 2, right? Right. Got it. Right. Right. Yep. They did. They definitely did. So actually, obviously, glass has been around for a very long time. At least 2,500 years, and in about the 13th century, somewhere in Italy, and it's debated. Every Italian city claims they invented it, but somewhere in Italy, some person experimenting with glass created glasses for reading glasses, basically. As you can see, this gentleman is wearing them, and that spread pretty quickly. So that by 1308, there's a sermon in which the preacher basically says, everyone now has these spectacles, and he's actually not complaining about it for once. And it's a gift to us because now everyone can read who couldn't read before. And it's been about 20 years now since they were introduced. So we think it's the kind of like the 1280s is probably when spectacles were invented. And this is what they looked like. So the first ones were and the ones in the medieval period, mostly, we actually have some new information. This is kind of news. It used to be thought that medieval glasses were only for reading. But and that glasses for nearsighted people like me weren't invented until the 17th century. But in 2018, a whole bunch of documents were found in Florence from the 15th century, clearly discussing the manufacture and sale and use of glasses for people who had distance vision issues. So they actually had both. They had convex and concave lenses, glasses both for people who needed them for reading, the older population generally, and people who needed them for seeing distance. So I'm actually kind of curious as to why our young man needs reading glasses, because they weren't really, the glasses for farsighted or for nearsightedness no, bad kitty, don't do that, weren't invented until like the 1450s. So not certain. I guess maybe he's just one of those unlucky people who needs reading glasses as a young man. But they're not like modern glasses. You can see this. Here's in both of these. This is actually I'm actually impressed. They actually did their homework. This is generally, as you can see, at least one option of how these lenses looked. Right? They're on a little hinge, and you just kind of put them on your nose and you pinch them in. You have to hold them, which is why you see a lot of reenactors. You see this mannequin on the right. A lot of modern reenactors want to use them like they use their regular glasses. So they actually add these strings to them and loop them over their ears, but that's not how medieval people wore them. They kept them, they folded up and they kept them in their pouch, and then when they needed them, they whipped them out and used them in that specific moment. So it's the strings to attach to the ears are an anachronism. Just wanted to put that out there. And if you're looking for a pair of these lovely lenses to have for whatever reason, or the frames, the Vehi Mercatus is actually the one. Those are the ones you can buy from them on the right. And I know people who get the frames, and go to their optician and have the optician set the lenses in them. So you can actually get them set up with your prescription.
That is really, really, really awesome. I have, to be honest with you, when I have gone to reenactment events, because I myself, for my own background to you guys, I mostly do early medieval reenactment, and I have gone to medieval events, like open reenactment events, where you'd see a mix and match of everything. And I have seen people with glasses, and I've been scratching my head going, what did they do my glasses on? So, yeah, thanks Rachel for clearing that all up. So many questions that I had in the past is definitely cleared up now. So we definitely don't have this in the early medieval period. So next time I see a reenactor kicking about with glasses in the early medieval period, I'll have to be questioning where is he getting his sources from. That we don't really, this is not really acceptable until we get to the late medieval period, which is quite interesting for myself.
13th century is when it really becomes a thing. So but yeah, and you see it if you now if you start looking for it in art, you're going to start seeing it, especially depictions of Saint Jerome in his study. He really always has spectacles. Bishops are often depicted with spectacles. You're going to, if you start looking for it, you're going to start seeing it.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating already.
So
what's going on here? We have a medical invention.
This gentleman looks like he needs some medical improvement.
Definitely not, especially to his clothes and his face.
Yeah, really, he's looking pretty rough. He definitely needs some spirits. Which brings us to distillation. A lot of people think of distillation and they think almost immediately they think of whiskey, right? I think that's most
Yes,
Westerners.
I was literally just thinking straight away, because this is coming up to the period of the invention of whiskey in Ireland, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. Oh God, wait. We're not going to get into that argument either. I don't want. Who invented whiskey? No. So, it's funny, people assume that because whiskey is now an alcohol that is consumed recreationally, that, alcohol was always meant to be a recreational drink, spirits, but that's not true at all, actually. What do you know about the distillation of substances and liquids historically?
I'm literally because it was, you see, I know the background from the Irish side of it, because every single time I'm in Scotland, I always get into this argument of who invented whiskey, and it's invented in Ireland, okay? Anybody wants to disagree with my can, right? And it's so funny because the mention of whiskey, which in Irish is referred to as the water of life. So the word, we have the word whiskey, and then if you were to translate it straight through, it would be referred to as the water of life, and that word actually appears in 1405. So Ireland in itself, you can see that connection with probably Florence, because this is the same time that Ireland is starting to build a relationship with Florence and stuff, so maybe that distillery and stuff got inside there. It was most likely came in with the monastic settlement, so it's mostly the priests and the church that would have worked with this kind of elements and stuff. But the actual thing, what they were working with before, actually comes in from the ancient times. I think it goes as far back as probably the Babylonians and stuff.
Well, So yeah, they had a very crude form of distillation, evaporative distillation, where they would literally just take a clay jar, put a liquid in it, and you're right, and put a lid on it. And apparently they were using this to distill pitch, pitch and sulfur, and to purify it for using for construction purposes. And they would actually use sponges to absorb the distillate, which was the condensation on top, off of the lid. So yeah, the kind of the general idea has been around for a while, but what most people think of when they think of distillation is this, of course. And that was created by the Arabs in the first during the golden age of Islam, basically during their big flowering of knowledge and science. They invented distillation as a way to try to get to the purest substance, right? It was alchemical in nature, right? They were trying to get to the purest substance, and that eventually makes its way to Europe in like the 12th, 13th century. And aquavite was the term for, they actually distilled a lot of weird things like mercury and lead and gold.
Yeah, I've come across that, alright. To try to become immortal, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the first alcohol they actually distilled, or the first alcoholic substance, was apparently wine. That was the first thing they distilled, and that was called aquavite, the water of life, right? So anything that sort of that first one, it was wine. But in the 15th century, people start getting the idea that they can actually take the liquids from other grains, ferment them, and then distill them. And that's where you start, the 15th century is where you start getting the rise of these national liquors, the spirits. And that's why they're called spirits, because it was thought that it would help a dispirited person. It was medicinal in nature, because it was a spirit and would help actually, with your four humors. And so they were actually being used medicinally, not recreationally, because look at this process. This is not a mechanized process. This is a manual labor. So it actually isn't easy to produce mass amounts of distilled liquid in this way. So people were using it medicinally, not recreationally. That's why we don't yet have, mass amounts of alcoholism destroying society, because you just can't produce it in large quantities.
But I think did we not invent the whiskey? There's a joke in Ireland, because Ireland then from this point onwards we have the invasion from the Tudors and the Cromwell and stuff. So there's a lack of inventions in Ireland. So a lot of people do joke that we invented whiskey, and then we have the sudden end of society.
Yeah, I think it probably has more to do with the English fucking everything up. Excuse my language. But it's an interesting. It is an interesting thought, but I don't think that in the 15th century they were able to produce enough quantity, or even the 16th century to produce enough quantity for it to be problematic. By the 17th century, no. Yeah, by the 17th century, probably.
I think that's when we start to see these whiskey companies start to collaborate, and some of left, right, centre. There's also that one joke as well. It was Farmer Matchup, the big statue of him in Cork. You can't miss it anywhere there. It's just beautiful, stunning statue. But I managed to convince the Irish to give it whiskey, right? Not realizing that it would actually mess up the society, that they were making so much money from the selling of whiskey in Ireland that it wrecked up the economy.
Oh my God.
When it comes down to Ireland, the discussions about whiskey just make me listen.
Yeah. You have to watch Foil Arms and Hogs skit on intervention. Look up their intervention. You will appreciate it. It relates to this. Check it out. You're going to laugh until you puke. Okay. So the thing, in terms of medical innovations, the thing that alcohol actually it is, so one of the reasons that people thought it would be medicinally useful is that there's um, this Franciscan monk in the 14th century who ends up in Avignon. He conducts these experiments. There's all this scientific ideas floating around through the entire medieval period. The idea of the Middle Ages being afraid of technology and innovation is just bullshit. So the church encouraged it. They did not discourage it. The discouraging of scientific advancement is a much later development. Um, so you've got this monk who's experimenting with distilling, and he's really getting into it. And he takes this alcohol and he starts doing testing, and he puts meat in alcohol, he puts it in vinegar, and he puts it in water to see which thing preserves it. And what he notices that meat in alcohol does not rot at all. And so that creates the idea, he theorizes that means that alcohol must in some way be able to prolong life and grant longevity. Um, because if it preserves the meat, then surely it will preserve the human. Um, and he's not wrong per se, because what he then does is he takes plants that are medicinally powerful, and he uses alcohol to extract their ingredients. And alcohol is a much more efficient extractive than water or oil or anything else they've been using. Like, we use vanilla extract in modern baking, right? Modern Western baking. He's the one who actually started doing that in the mid 14th century, and so he's actually able to create more powerful medicinal substances because he's using distilled wine, aqua vitae, to extract the active ingredients from these plants.
What's crazy was we actually do, I should have actually sent you out biochemistry in Kingdom Come Deliverance, so you can actually experiment and make your own chemicals and stuff in Kingdom Come Deliverance. I should have actually sent that out to you. So Henry himself can actually play around and do some work.
Oh, well, maybe that's why he looks like this. Yeah, so that is pretty funny to think that this, nowadays, of course, alcohol is a major problem in Western society and actually world over for alcoholism, but that at its inception, it actually, gave us a leg up on the medicinal front. And we've just kind of wandered away from that. Oh, well. Good and for bad, yeah. So oil painting is another innovation, a medieval innovation, and it's in the early 15th century where it really takes off. So you sent me these shots, which I...
That was meant to be Kingdom Come's expression of showing off the innovation of oil paintings in Bohemia in the period. What do you think?
They look like tempera manuscript illuminations to me, because this is what oil painting looks like. So it's funny. People assume Vasari is this 16th century Italian historian writing about the lives of artists. It's how we know so much about the artists, but he doesn't always get it right. And he says that the Flems were the ones that Jan van Eyck invented oil painting. Suddenly there was oil painting, just like, the Renaissance happened in 1402, right? So that's not true. Oil painting is actually described in detail in a 12th century art manual by Theophilus. And so they had been using oil painting for a while, but they used it mostly on wood, and not wood panels, but like sculptures or statues, crucifixes, and on stone. But there's something that happens after the Black Death that makes artists revisit oil painting as a medium that is more suited to their goal. Have you read anything about why oil painting took over in the 15th century?
Oh, now you've caught me off guard. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, so if you look at... dummy. I'm sorry, everyone. I failed you entirely. I didn't include pictures of what was used mostly before, which is tempera, which is basically an egg yolk-based paint. So tempera creates very ethereal, sort of celestial colors, much paler, much softer, much less vibrant. Oil painting, by contrast, you can get these amazing, deep, vibrant colors. So there, I actually read a really fascinating paper that posited, and I can actually see this, that after the Black Death, people are changing the way they're thinking. Instead of being very spiritually oriented and focusing really on their heavenly life, on the spiritual, people are starting to focus more on the corporeal, on humanity, on people, instead of on heaven. And so instead of having art that reflects this sort of ephemeral, this ephemeral style, this ephemeral vibe, this ephemeral philosophy, for which tempera is perfect. It's really great at creating that kind of, sort of surreal look. They now want reality. They want realism. So oil painting is much more suited to realism than tempera is. So there's a theory the theory is, it's not about the technology necessarily. It's about the shift in philosophy that was triggered by the Black Death. And right. And again, I failed, but I'll be honest, these look more like tempera paintings than oil paintings. Are they? Yeah.
Just a wee bit.
They definitely don't. They failed on the Van Eyck test.
Hopefully we can see much better in Kingdom Come 2.
Hopefully, yeah. But what oil painting also allows, it allows a slower, longer work because it dries very slowly, so you can keep working on the same panel over a longer period and keep touching it up and keep reworking it. But tempera, it dries and you're done, right? So it has there's a different approach to how you would paint with tempera than painting with oil painting. So it also results in a very different product. So. Yeah, I thought it was fascinating to think that it wasn't a technological shift that led to the resurgence or the surgence of oil painting as a technique, but this philosophical shift that you see in the literature, right? The literature suddenly starts getting much more human focused and less God focused after the Black Death.
You see, I always thought this is me making a massive assumption, never actually doing the research myself. I just thought there was just a sudden flick of the Renaissance. Okay, Renaissance time, let's switch over to oil paintings. And I always thought it was more oil, God focused with the oil paintings. I didn't realize it was actually may have been the other way around, which kind of like opens up my mind a wee bit more to the possibility of, okay, so how are they thinking both in the, was it the high medieval age, between the 13th century, and now how are they thinking going into the 15th century? Now they're going to start to adapt into oil paintings and stuff, and it wasn't the case of just, flicking on the switch, okay, Tans, here's our brains. Right. That in case, in fact, it is just a switch in philosophy and the perspective of God, especially, people are questioning the clergy, especially like in Ireland, for example. They've seen the clergy now die, the clergy now bleed, as they would say. Right. And that brings up a lot of questions. Why would God allow the clergy to die? And people are starting to question the society around them. From my perspective as an Irish historian. Yeah. So I assume that's the same thing that's going on in Europe.
Everywhere. It's happening. The only place where it doesn't seem to be happening is Spain. Is the Iberian Peninsula. But that's because Spain is always, like the Mongols, Spain is always the exception to the rules of history, right? Like none of the rules of warfare apply to the Mongols. None of the rules of European history apply to the Iberian Peninsula because you've got this massive melting pot of religions and cultures because, the Arabs come, you've got the Visigoths who take over from the Romans, and then you've got the Arabs who and the Berbers who stream up through, across the gates of Hercules, and, then you've got this, Jews living there happily, and Muslims living there happily, and Christians living there happily, but then you've got the Reconquista that kind of starts with the Crusades, basically. And so in Spain, they are so focused on crusade, let's take it back, well, let's not even take it back, let's take it over. That there doesn't seem to be, at least in terms of the literature, because I studied medieval Spanish literature, it's one of my languages, and there doesn't seem to be that same kind of resurgence of humanism or surgence of humanism in Spain on the Iberian Peninsula that seems to be everywhere else. You know, the Reformation does not come to Spain.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating because when it comes down to from an Irish perspective, Spain is always seen as the counter-Reformation. You know, any time Ireland wants to go for counter-Reformation, Spain is like,
Right. Well, you know, Spain was practical, right? So England was an enemy at that point, because you know we're talking post-Reformation at this point. England was or peri-Reformation. So you know, England was an enemy. Spain didn't really care so much about the religious persuasions of their allies as long as their allies did the thing. But but also, you know, but also Ireland was ostensibly Catholic in the 16th and 17th century, while England was, you know, going the way of the heretic. So, yeah. I agree. I'm gonna try not to get booted from YouTube by making comments. Right. Right. Yeah, so that's basically oil painting. Why I think, after having read that essay, especially because I couldn't find any like technological innovation. Now, if anyone else knows something more about the innovation involved in oil painting in this, if there was some kind of, I tried to find maybe there was an improvement in refining linseed oil, which is a key, or walnut oil, which are key ingredients in oil painting. I tried to find if there was some kind of innovation in mixing paints, because of course artists actually had to mix their own paints. This is, people don't realize, being an artist in the pre-modern, pre-industrial world was hard, because you had to grind your own pigments, bind it, mix it, you know, and the degree to which you grind your pigments will determine how translucent or opaque that color is, and how much binder you mix in will determine how well it sticks to your medium and whether it cracks and falls off or ages, or, I mean, it's a science. Being an artist in the Middle Ages was literally being a scientist. Right? It was.
I never even thought about that side, because I always look at, because my wife, she goes way more into art history than I do, but from my perspective, from that heavily glance into the history of art in Europe, I always try to see Leonardo da Vinci just get burned and walk away.
Yeah, right. The worst artist of the Renaissance, Leonardo da Vinci.
So you're telling me, after all of that work that's put in to make all of those ingredients and stuff, he still gets burned and just walks away?
He still gets bored and walks away, and lets the oils dry. And yeah, and pigments are super expensive in this era, by the way, especially that blue. So you see that blue on Our Lady's sleeves there, and the blue that's peeking out at her hem, the blue dress, right? So that blue, and you can see the blue in the sky here, and the blue here on these garments and on the altarpieces doors, the triptychs doors there, right? That blue is created with lapis lazuli, azurite. That is crazy expensive because it only comes from Afghanistan. So the reason you start seeing blue cropping up in all sorts of places in art is because it's conspicuous consumption. It's the Ferrari of paint. So
Yeah.
so
in Ireland, we have the resurgence of the Brehon laws, late medieval laws in Ireland, and in Brehon laws, the two best colours that you can get, it's only allowed for the head, the Taoiseachs, which are the head of the assemblies. They're the only people in law in Ireland that can wear blue. Like, blue is proper up there on the period, so I 100% literally will support exactly what you say about blue there. Although this is blue for paint, it's not really blue for clothing.
Right.
Even in Irish society, blue is only allowed to be used by the Taoiseach looks the head of the chiefs in Irish society, and it's literally referred to as royal blue because it's only there at the head of the clans.
Well, is this first millennium? We're talking about the Golden Age.
From the Golden Age all the way up to the 15th century. Why do you have a counter?
Yeah, well, so I would suspect royal blue might not be blue. Royal blue might be purple, or violet. I would be interested to know what dye stuff they're talking about, because actually woad is a weed. It grows everywhere, and all you need to do is grind it and mix it with some stale urine, and you get blue. So
this is where I don't specialize in clothing, but that's Melissa's field anyway. I have that's Melissa on this, but I've actually heard of this argument a good few times. That actually, like, why is it the fact that in the early Irish law, all the way up to British law in the late medieval period, why is blue up there when you've got woad growing everywhere? Like, you even have the image, obviously, in Braveheart of everyone painting themselves in blue woad and stuff. But it's there. That's kind of it's always the question of, okay, so in the fantasy we have blue woad being painted on our face, and woad is easy accessible. Then why is it in reality that only the King of Ireland can wear blue woad? So that's a really, really interesting argument to put forward. Yeah, I have to go to Berg and Pride, certain university people when they're not busy. Because anytime we put
well,
if you use word by itself, I think it gives it like kind of a dirty piss smell, or dirty piss green.
Yeah. You have to. Yeah. You do. You have to ferment the.
You have to ferment it for it to be actually blue.
Yeah, that's what Yuki's saying. Is it because only royalty had time to ferment the woad?
No. So urine was produced. So here's how urine was collected. People basically, like, inns, taverns would actually have piss pots, and their customers would go and piss in the piss pot, and the innkeeper would sell that to the dyers, and the dyers would just have these massive vats of urine just fermenting. Once you people are always, urine is not in short supply, so in all of Europe, peasants wear blue. Blue is the color of the peasants. Right, so, but that's why I suspect that it might not be woad blue. It might be a different shade of blue. It might be something more. It might, just because it says blue in the laws and that's how the word is translated, doesn't mean it's what we think of as blue. This is the linguist also coming out. So I'd be interested in an etymological search into that word, and there might be some commentary in some first millennium document discussing what they mean by blue, because not all reds are the same either, right? So in this period, you've got so if you look here in the picture on the left, the painting on the left, the Arnolfini portrait, they've got like this massive red canopy and red bedspreads. That's Kermes red. So Kermes is an insect. It's a louse. It grows on it's extinct now mostly, I think, on oak trees, and it creates what we call crimson, the red of royalty. It is the deepest, bestest, richest shade of red. You can get red from other things, but those other things are cheaper and don't produce the same quality of red. So my suspicion is it's probably not woad blue that they're talking about in the Brehon laws, and it might not be what we think of as blue at all, right? So just words, it's stupid, but philosophically, what does blue look like to you? It might not look to you the way it does to me.
Yeah, because there's also an argument that John Kerry brings up as well, is that I think which colour was, I think it's green or maybe it's blue as well, where they assume because of the language that people are using in the early medieval period that their eyes haven't fully developed yet.
Right.
I have to look at John Kerry's work, and maybe Yuki knows about it. But yeah, there's some people who argue that the eye isn't fully developed, and I've heard.
What, the glass?
Yeah, the glass. Is it glass, is it?
Glass or green or blue. Emma described it in a certain way, where it's kind of, it also means grey as well. It's an umbrella term of those like dull, greyish, greenish, bluish colour. It's part of the sea, as Emma explained.
Yeah, it's so basically, as Yuki was explaining there, it's between, so it's the green word green and the way
Right.
that the word green is applied.
Right.
There's another word for the green, like grass green.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the way that people are using the word green in the early medieval period, it highlights to the University College of Cork that perhaps people's eyes were fully developed, that the way that they're using green for, the green of the sea and
Right.
the green of the grass and stuff, it seems because they're using it in a kind of greyish green
Right.
description sometimes, and sometimes when it's grey, they're just like, oh, that's green. So it's kind of applying to the University College of Cork that maybe people's eyes aren't fully developed in the early medieval period, and that's why it's applied where it is.
The word green is the word glass.
Yeah.
Umbrellas.
Yeah, it's an umbrella.
They're not calling grey green.
It's in that funny different area, like.
Right. Yeah. So that's why I always question things like that, because blue is really easy. It's literally the color that all peasants. That's why when people talk about peasants, oh, they always wore gray or brown clothes. No, peasants wore blue clothes. A lot of blue clothes. That's why they're often depicted in blue clothing, because it was an relatively affordable dye. By the way, it doesn't take urine long to ferment. It does not take long. I have done a lot of medieval dyeing using fermented urine that has been produced by someone who had strong drink, which is what the dyeing manuals tell you should use. That's why particularly dyers wanted the urine from the taverns, because those people would have had strong drink. And it doesn't. Urine can ferment in as little as 24 hours. It's not that quick. It's not a slow process. Yeah, it's not like wine where you have to kind of let it go. It just goes.
So I suppose that's where we can live in history to nail these things down.
Yeah, and let me tell you, I've done a lot with urine over the years. It's like the magical substance of the Middle Ages, urine. Okay, moving on from urine and painting.
I just have one question there pop up in the chat about could it be indigo brown instead?
That is an interesting question. So yeah, indigo comes from the subcontinent. It comes from India, which is why it's called indigo, I think, etymologically. Indigo didn't make its way, as far as I know, into Europe until it doesn't start appearing in trade records until the 15th century. I don't know about Ireland, though. Like, Ireland, for all I know, might have had some magic Indian connection, trade connection. Who knows?
I have no idea.
The problem, as far as I understand it, chemically, indigo and woad are the same in terms of the dye stuff. So if you analyze a textile, you will get the same chemical composition, whether it's dyed with indigo or woad, and they involve the same process. So I don't know if we could even tell that, whether it was indigo or woad. As far as I understand, and having dyed with both, they do pretty much produce the same, more or less the same shade, but chemically they're the same. So I don't know if we could actually even tell that. So I don't think it would be indigo blue. I tend to think, like, people think of Tyrian purple as being purple, but it wasn't. It was like this violet color. It was like this combination of red and purple. It was a more nuanced color than just purple, right? So that's why I'm thinking maybe this blue is actually a different blue, and it's actually a question of over dyeing. So you would do one dye bath in one color, and then you do it in a different color to create this really rich, complex color, which is much more, certainly more expensive than just woad dyeing.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think Susan has a follow-up there as well on the Tyrian purple. Is from the sea cells around the cloak. Did medieval dyes and painters have substances?
So Murex is the name of the sea snail that was used for Tyrian purple. Apparently, the Murex factories first off, the Byzantine Empire held a monopoly on that. No one else was making Tyrian purple. And when the Crusaders sacked Constantinople in 1204, yay! No, that was terrible. That was a terrible moment in our history. When they sacked their ally, the Christian kingdom or Christian city of Constantinople, the Tyrian, there weren't enough people left afterwards to actually keep manufacturing the Tyrian purple, and so the manufactories were abandoned, and that is literally 1204 is the last time Tyrian purple was apparently produced. So there was no more Tyrian purple after that point, except in whatever garments had already had it. And as far as I know, no real substitute has ever been found. There's, like I said, you can do over dyeing. You can dye with kermes and then over dye with a blue maybe, and that might get you something close. We have all these colors listed in inventories from the era that maybe were an attempt to get close to that, but I don't think they ever did. And Murex is a nasty, oh my God. Murex dyeing, it stinks. You have to I have a friend who actually experimented with this very recently, a couple of months ago. She actually bought Murex, live Murex, and then painstakingly extracted their little bodies from the shells, and then put them in a bowl and let them ferment, because you have to let it ferment, and it just, the smell, terrible. Fermented urine is an improvement on the smell.
Okay, that's saying something. That is definitely saying something to the next level.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me that no one said, maybe we should go back to that. Everyone's like, yeah, I think we're okay without it. Okay, speaking of fabric, the Great Wheel. So a lot of people, we just included these characters for visual interest. Also, that gentleman in the center, that outfit is just so terrible on so many levels. Oh my God. Oh my God. And for those interested in Lady Stephanie, I've got a full video coming out on her ensemble in detail, analyzing it and saying what went wrong and the few things that went right. So you can learn a lot about Bohemian fashion for ladies in 1400, coming out very shortly. The Great Wheel, so the spinning wheel. Philip, when you go to reenactment events, have you ever seen people, ladies, probably working with a spinning wheel?
Yeah, we have the Viking version of it. I think it's the table, isn't it? The weaving table that they use in the period and stuff. Something I'm told 100% to stay away from.
Right.
Go back and play with your hands there. But yeah, I've seen, not so much the wheel itself, but I have seen the weaving table in the early medieval period and stuff. So yeah, I am aware of the wheel itself. I haven't delved too much into the high Middle Ages and stuff when it comes down to my reenactment and living history side of it, but I am aware of it.
Right, so the spinning wheel is apparently actually invented in China in like the first millennium, and eventually makes its way westward, as so many innovations did. And so we don't even get a spinning wheel in Europe until the 13th century. And it looks like this. So this is what's called a great wheel or a walking wheel, because you literally have to actually walk back to do the drafting. And you'll notice it's manually turned. There is no pedal. There is no treadle. So you actually have to spin it to keep it going. And so it's a different kind of process than the kind of spinning wheels where you see someone sitting there with their foot going up and down. If you see those people at medieval fairs, that's anachronistic. That is post-medieval period and post-Renaissance. I think they were invented in the 17th or even the 18th century. Yeah.
So definitely not spinning one.
Definitely not that kind. This kind, yes. This kind, yes. But yeah, so the thing that this allows, this increases the speed of production massively, because before that, the only thing you had, and I forgot to include them, were drop spindles, right? So you see the distaff, and you've got a spindle, and you have to drop it. But what I found out that's very interesting, I learned this a little while ago actually, is that drop spindle thread was a much higher quality, was much more even, was much finer than the yarn, the thread that was being produced on these great wheels. To the point that there were laws against using, the guild laws, from using wheel-spun yarn or thread in the weaving process for anything but the weft. You couldn't use it for the warp, for the part that would actually, you could use it for the weft, but not the warp, because it wasn't as quality as the drop spindle thread. But even still, this kind of invention means that suddenly you can produce materials faster with less labor.
Yes.
And then the price of goods comes down, right? Just checking the
Yeah,
comments.
that's absolutely fascinating. And so, even in I know some people had kind of brought in, we're kind of going back to kind of revisionist history. It does seem that once Emperor Frederick II comes in, that we're starting to see this kind of early Renaissance, as they would say. So,
Right.
I think what people are looking at now are kind of, okay, let's look at this from a revisionist point of view. There's definitely substance there for this whole idea of kind of early Renaissance, is there?
I agree, and honestly, I think it all ties back, for Western Europe anyway, it ties back to the Crusades, right? So, there's this massive migration. Most people just look at the Crusades from the military perspective, but they forget this massive cultural thing. You've got this massive migration of second sons and their families moving to inhabit the Holy Land at the navel of trade, basically. And so suddenly they're being exposed to all sorts of new technologies, fashions, foods, literature, right? And then when they eventually get evicted, they go back and they take all of that with them. So yeah, Frederick II absolutely plays a big role in that, for certain. That's why I say the Renaissance didn't happen in 1350 or 1400. It's a process.
Yeah, it just seems so. I just think Frederick II, I just have two comments on saying that one. It's definitely Emperor Frederick II. He's definitely worth reading, especially when it comes down to his weird bastard crusade that he holds while he's excommunicated.
Yeah.
Where he fucks up and instead of physically taking what he wants, he just has a good conversation with everybody, gets the land he wants, gets a crowned. At this stage, he's not just Holy Roman Emperor dictating it from his own palace in Sicily. He's also now King of Jerusalem, which he just negotiated and went back, while still being excommunicated. So if you haven't read about Emperor Frederick II before, definitely read about him now because he's absolutely fascinating, and it's very difficult to read his entire biography and then come to the conclusion that that was still a dark age. The man is definitely this early Renaissance man for sure.
Yeah, the court in Sicily was almost a magical place, right? It was multicultural, it was artistic, it was innovative, definitely also military power. It was like the best of all worlds.
Yes, big time.
It could.
A man way ahead of his time. As I was saying earlier, we spent most of it being excommunicated because he was just way too far thinking.
Yeah.
Way too far thinking for anything.
He really was, but it's people like that that have allowed us to get to where we are today.
And the second one, especially in Ireland, it's only now that we're starting to look at the First Crusade from because at the time we had, as I pointed out, especially within my YouTube community, they never talked about it's work for horror, and it's very interesting because people assume that they were around England, they were now through military through England, and then we would have plain words at the right. We don't. We've got this plain words and word horror, which was seen in Germany, Scandinavia, Sweden, especially within Sweden.
Right.
So people are like, okay, so it came in from Scandinavia into Scotland and then into Ireland, and then even before you have to come over the Normans, we have the Northern Winter.
Right.
That appears in Ireland. And Contessa's view to Tony's vision, it talks about before that, and that's before the coming of the Normans into Ireland. And so part of that, Tony's vision is a big kind of it covers a lot of political stuff, but it also encourages this kind of crusade or romantic idea as well. Because the story of Tony's vision is about a knight who has visions about going to hell and stuff.
Right.
It's kind of an early Dante's Inferno where he goes to hell. And so it kind of plays in a lot of the rituals that are so pure at the time of putting on and stuff and the Holy Crown and stuff.
Right.
And so it's before the kind of Normans is kind of this idea of crusaders coming back, but they also return into Ireland as well. So it's this whole idea that actually Ireland was a part of the crusades. We actually had crusaders in Ireland before the English Normans came into the country at the time. And perhaps maybe they were. So even in my comment section, it was the whole debate of, okay, so what kind of, especially with the developments that they have with the Cameron in France
Right.
So it's very interesting that there are some people that are shunning revision history. Sometimes you feel like you have to dig in and say, okay, we didn't see these impacts before, but
Yeah.
now we do see these impacts, and we need to question that in the interpretation that we have right now. Definitely.
Yeah, it's etymologically actually it's fascinating because yeah, in German Ritter and then Ritter in Ireland, it's all obviously riders, right? It focuses on the horse aspect, on having a horse and riding it being essential to knighthood. But the English word knecht comes also from the German, from the Anglo-Saxon knecht, which means servant. So it's a very interesting how, you know, and even though both those words are Germanic in origin, in the English culture, the word for knight is derived from the Germanic word for servant, or well, knight is the Germanic word for servant, but then everyone else is focusing, including French, including the Romance languages, right? All the words for knights have to do with horses, but not in England. That is really fascinating because, you know, it's chevalier, it's caballero, it's, you know, the Italian word is failing me, but it is definitely also a knight, also relating to horses. But yet in Ireland too, it's about you're not a knight if you don't have a horse and don't ride, right? Because that's what makes you a knight.
Well, we actually could make a talk about this all night because I don't specialize in language. If you haven't noticed, but I have conference in a lot of different theories and it definitely revolves around the horse in Ireland because you often see the word winner applied within the normals who don't actually use their cavalry charge in Ireland until the normals come in. They actually have proper cavalry charges in Ireland. So sometimes like these nights are a lot of the time they're done enough their horse to go and fight in the field. So it could imply that there are people who just use their horse, especially to drive hills and stuff, just beforehand. So it's very debated why exactly it could be, and it most likely does come out from the skin because we're still in the kind of period that is, because as you said earlier, it's not a story debate of waking up, and
Right.
it's simply the end of the Viking Age.
Right.
It's kind of a period between the Viking Age and the age of the Barbarian reform, just butchered that way. It's the ancient art of the reform, and so we still have that connection right and into war and into Denmark and into Iceland, of course, as well. So we've got those influences of worlds from Batman to the Atlantis to word Axe as well.
Right.
So we still have those influences coming in. So is it a case where if the Norwegians are saying about night, the Romans about night as well? I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, it could be. Language is a funny thing.
Yeah.
So, moving on to other innovations that people might not realize were innovations in this era, but were really important and to the modern world. Hourglasses and mechanical clocks. So, timekeeping that does not rely on the sun. Yeah. So, what do you know anything about hourglasses?
Very little, to be quite honest with you. And there may be hourglasses in Ireland, when it comes down to clocks, Ireland is so behind. As I was saying earlier there, this is just before we had the Tudor conquest and conquest. So it's never until we get to the 19th century that all these technologies to do clocks and stuff really make their way around the world.
All right.
So obviously we're very lucky about it, and that's what we can compare to. And what's the coincidence talking about clocks
Oh God.
and glasses and stuff?
Yeah, they're so you know one of the earlier forms of clocks was a water clock, and you know because you can kind of time based on the water flow how much time is passing. But apparently, and I didn't know this until I started looking more deeply, water clocks are inferior to hourglasses because water apparently the amount of water in the bowl will actually impact the flow rate. So the more water that's in the bowl to start with, the faster it flows overall. So it's not a linear rate, but sand is not impacted by that in an hourglass. So no matter how much sand you put in, still it will flow at exactly the same rate. So it's a much more reliable timer than water is, which is why no one uses water clocks anymore because someone figured out about putting sand in hourglass. The earliest hourglass reference we have is the one on the right there, actually, 1338. So when they were invented, I wasn't able to actually pinpoint. If anyone knows has like evidence as to when they were invented, please do let us know in the comments.
Definitely on my side, because I haven't, like, if you start with the builders, they must have had access to sunglasses and stuff, but I've never heard of any fly-ins in Ireland as of yet, so I'm completely unaware, because at the time, anytime I ask about these questions and stuff, it's mostly the sundial, or man into sundials in Ireland, which is very strange, given that Ireland is a very dark country most of the time.
Right.
Yeah,
That is pretty funny. It's like, what time is it? Ask me in June.
100%. Thomas is getting in there with the wording for
Right.
with the Swedish. I've heard of that one before as well. That there's a lot of Swedish connections with the Irish word, the Gaelic word, and its connections with Sweden as well. So I think he's right there about that.
Interesting. Yeah, so he says Swedish derivation connect means someone that fights for duty, not a salary from the Latin solidus, which was a soldat. A noble mounted warrior was oh God, I'm sorry, Thomas, my Swedish is terrible. Edare, from the German word Reiter. Ritter, yeah. Interesting. Oh, ridare. Oh, I see, ridare. Correction down below. Yeah. So that is interesting. Yeah, whereas in English we just went straight with connect, which means fighting for duty. Yeah, because that was the focus of a knight. That could actually be possibly because the early English knights, the Anglo-Saxons, maybe weren't always mounted.
In Ireland,
Yeah.
they're not mounted. They actually, the descriptions we have of them in battle is that they dismount with was it the two-handed axe in order. They most likely already have Vinci down their back.
Right.
In the descriptions that we have in the chess pieces and stuff, they are horsing with the spear and stuff.
Right.
So you most likely did have a Vinci and a spear, and also would have had a two-handed axe as well. But they're never described as doing cavalry charges.
Right.
Especially with the Norman version of Ireland and stuff, they always dismount the fight and the fall with the rest of the men and stuff. It's not until the Normans coming into Ireland that my knowledge of military history in the Iron Ages is when the Normans come in, then you have cavalry charges.
Right. Got it.
And it's the English and the Normans who bring that in.
Well, so back to our topic of clocks. So mechanical clocks are also invented in this period, and I should have included a photo of the amazing clock that is still in Prague from the 14th century, I think. But clocks weren't just about time; they actually also tracked the planetary movements. So medieval clocks were extremely sophisticated, complex devices. Now, whether they were invented or if they were just continuing from sort of ancient Greek and ancient Roman inventions or innovations, because there's the Antikythera. God, why am I having problems with this word this morning? The amazing device they found in the bottom of the Mediterranean that turns out to be this complex calculation machine. So that's from 2,000 years ago. So there's a debate about whether, mechanical clocks were invented cleanly in medieval Europe, or if someone just kind of continued on from work that the ancient Greeks had already started. But the point is the same. Suddenly we're now able to measure time in a much more precise manner, and unfortunately I can tie that directly to modern anxiety. Because now you have to be there on the dot, because we can tell when the dot is, right? But when you're working with a sundial, it's like, well, it kind of looks like the right time. We should amble over that way and be ready for the meeting,
Yeah, now I see where Florentine traders wanted to get posted in Ireland so much, where we just have the sundial. The sun is
It's not the time yet. When the sun comes out, it will be time. But apparently, the hourglasses, I'm not certain if they were invented because of this, but they led to the ability to navigate long distances of water much more accurately, because you could chart your path accurately. Someone actually kept their eye on the hourglass and kept turning it, and you could actually chart your course and figure out where you were on the horizon with your sextant.
That's cute.
So that ties into our next innovation, shipbuilding, which is going to lead to our violent innovations in the military front.
Yeah, I was just thinking that because the Irish just use it for a whole lot of piracy, going between the New World and what was it called? Between England and also the Spanish Armadas coming up as well. So going into the Renaissance, the Irish are already captivated or looking at these boats and they're just like, raiding, piracy. Nice. Because even the development of castles there in order to protect against piracy.
Right.
Going into the Renaissance, and then obviously you've got that famous scene that everybody's eaten right afterwards to recreate, which is the famous scene which took place in Raleigh and Elizabeth, where Elizabeth said, "You slept on the palace."
Sure, totally. She does not. Yeah. Ah, what a woman. Shutters? All right. Oh, no. Oh, my God.
And guess what she sees? She sees, this was the, I'm sure it was the dogs that did it to her. And she sees, I know the correction in the comment section below, so that's going to affect me on this one. But I'm sure it was the dogs. It was either the dogs or the dogs that did it to her. But she saw the young Anisha, the young prince, on the beach. And she's like, fence. She goes against the boat, stands up, and she runs along with the princess like, so she accepts the ransom from the child and gives him back. And the whole time she's just like,
Tisk.
So she's so kind.
Well, I mean, Irish rules of hospitality are pretty damn strict. So I think she was well within her rights, and that she only demanded a ransom is actually pretty civil, in my opinion.
Yes. She was just a character. I think she was just a principal that she had the child and she
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. As she should have. I'm sorry. They were rude. Brilliant. Oh, that's my, I've actually seen that being done in the modern world. Here in Korea, actually. So shipbuilding. So yeah, one of the ways that Grace O'Malley was so triumphant was ships. So we've got this serious innovation happening after the Black Death. Ships go, they add more sophisticated sails. You've got the cog, which was around for a while, but then they developed the hulk. And then the Portuguese get really creative with caravels. And they add a forecastle and a stern castle to them. And suddenly these ships are designed for long distance travel. So that's definitely a big thing. Do they actually how do they make an appearance in Kingdom Come Deliverance? It's landlocked, so I'm assuming shipbuilding maybe doesn't have a big impact.
I've seen these images. The images from the second game, but we don't know how far the game goes yet because the game starts. Kingdom Come 1 is set completely within 1403, but Kingdom Come 2, we're not sure of all the locations yet because they want to keep it a surprise, and we're not sure how far the game goes. We know at the very start of Kingdom Come 2, they are at the point of 1403, but they have to very quickly make their way over to 1419 where the high
Right.
starts, and then they have to tell the entire story within how many games they plan on doing after this, and make their way all the way to 1434. So perhaps, given the image that most of this war was happening within the Holy Roman Empire.
Oh
So
my God.
I don't know. Who knows?
Are these? So this is a still from the second game, is it?
Rumor has it that that's taken from the second game, so I'm not quite sure what the story is yet. However, rumors have circulated that perhaps Kingdom Come 2 is highlighting the developments of ship warfare
All
in the
right.
second game. So it's up in the air really, and it's apparent that the dates of what could be happening.
Right. Well, even though I did find references to cannons being used on ships in battles in the early 14th century, there were no broadsides. Broadsides, that doesn't develop until the 16th century. Henry's ship, the Mary Rose, that sank in the Channel and half of which was perfectly preserved, she had a complete complement of cannons, and she was absolutely designed for cannon warfare. In 1403, I don't think so.
Yeah, so most likely what we're dealing with is somebody's putting in some false information for clicks, perhaps.
I assume so,
Regardless, I
yeah.
think our point's still going to stand, so there is still developments in shipbuilding in this period.
I mean, absolutely, for certain. And I'm not saying they didn't have cannon. I mean, here's a replica of John Cabot's ship, who was one of the first Englishmen to get to North America. And it has cannon holes. They certainly had cannon. It's just you're not going to it's not going to be 40, 50 guns full on broadside and go. But that's 1497. That's still not 1403 or the Hussite War. But yeah, shipbuilding.
Because even looking at the image now, I was just quickly, when I was actually doing the research, I was quickly going through all the stuff, and I've seen Norma pictures the same with the glasses.
Right.
And I was like, I like the argument that person's making, that this could be a way further. And so, but I do think that the first story of the glasses was like, even looking at that map now, with the big massive stars,
Yeah.
distance, this is actually fake warfare.
So
Interesting argument nonetheless.
it is. I mean, for certain, shipbuilding at this point is really also experiencing massive innovations, leaps and bounds, and that's what's going to allow Europe to go out and colonize the world, for better or for worse, mostly for worse. So yeah, there is definitely an increase in shipbuilding technology, and ships, of course, offer new ways to wage war, better ships. Because before ships in the ancient world, ships were used in warfare on a massive scale, but there's like this period in the Middle Ages where they seem to have forgotten how to build ships, triremes. They've forgotten about all of that somehow. They've just decided not to do it. So now that we're getting back into ship development, suddenly that's an option for warfare. So that brings us to our military innovations. Yeah, there's a lot.
Oh yes.
Yeah, there's so much happening after the Black Death in terms of they're taking up things that weren't new, but they're innovating on old ideas and taking them to the next level. Yeah.
Yeah, because people have a very traditional idea of the crossbow. Well, sometimes people think it's the machine gun of the medieval world, and because of the TV show The Vikings, where they had an episode where the French and the Vikings were fighting each other, and in it the French suddenly took out their crossbow machine guns, started clearing entire rooms. And since that time, I've had, because I was doing living history in Ireland at the time, I had so many people come up to me and said, why didn't they just keep using crossbows? And I'm like, because crossbows didn't function like that in the early medieval period.
They didn't even have triggers. I mean, they didn't have triggers. Medieval bows didn't have triggers.
We have today, definitely. And for a very long time, you would have had people that would have fired off one shot, and then they would have pretty much ditched it and then moved on to whatever secondary weapon that they had, or even just joined the line fighting. I think and because the second major problem with crossbows in this period, people think crossbows aren't developing, and then we switch to guns, and then the crossbow gets chucked in the bin. And in fact, it's not like that at all. In fact, people are using more crossbows now than they are guns, because guns are still developing. And crossbows, in fact, have huge developments in the late medieval period.
They do. Steel is a very important one. Because before that they were using composite bows, which are amazing, it's amazing how you make a composite bow. I've seen a bow maker making, all these layers laminated together, different parts of the yew tree chosen in specific parts of the lamination, and they are amazing and they're flexible. But steel apparently gives you a real advantage. um, because it's much more reliable. It's not subject to the vicissitudes of weather, the way wood is, and that's a big innovation in about this time. And I actually, for those who might like their own 14th century steel crossbow, Todd's Workshop makes them. Here's a replica of one of them. Yeah, it's a pretty amazing piece of technology, actually.
Yeah, Todd's workshop is absolutely magnificent. I haven't followed him. Last time I was following him was last month when he was trying to sell us trebuchet. So it's definitely worth, if you haven't subscribed to Todd's workshop, it's definitely worth watching and stuff, especially around the periods of the Wars of the Roses and stuff. The content he does with the likes of Matt Easton is absolutely magnificent, so it's definitely worth watching his channel. I definitely have to tune in today or some stage to see if he sold his trebuchet or not. I know he sold it to him. Because he was able to set that on fire, not the trebuchet itself on fire, but actually, the rounds
Right,
on fire.
right.
He was able to set those on fire and send them on fire. So it's definitely worth watching to see what kind of lunatic will they have about that anyway.
Yeah, so Todd's Workshop also, he makes amazing things. I have multiple of his knives. I have two of his. I've got so much of his stuff. It's top quality. He's not a sponsor of my channel. I'm just recommending him because his yeah, right. I wish he were. Todd, if you're watching, I can always use another. More channel sponsors is a good thing. But no, his stuff is quality, and he's in the UK, so it's good to support people getting paid a proper living wage. Yeah. So steel really comes in and just changes the game when it comes to crossbows. And they like you said, they are not replaced immediately by firearms for all the reasons you said. Right? They're just not.
The Irish want to get gun friendly straight away, but you don't see the Irish fully adopting it until going into the 16th century. So going into the Wars of the Roses, we're trying to use, as people say, you probably correct me on the correct pronunciation of this, hand cannons. So you have people trying to take on handguns or hand cannons, or however you want to say it. But if you want to read about the Irish using guns in Ireland, both Kearns and Gallo glass is a really great book, and you can see straight away it's the Kearns that absolutely love these boom sticks, and especially when it comes down to dealing with pilots and stuff. So straight away it's many guns they're training with the first off it's the English bringing guns into Ireland with Lionel and Antwerp. Scarborough is captured in siege, and from there the O'Neills take their guns away with them, and then it is Richard II in Dublin, the likes of the Bubonic Plague and the Fitzgeralds. They basically get into Dublin and get a hold of these guns and steal it, kill them out of local population. So all these guns are basically brought in to fight the Irish, the Irish military.
Right.
And then once the Irish have a taste of guns, they're straight away going over. So not only are they still campaigning in France with the English, by the way, against the French and so on, you also have the connection that the Fitzgeralds with France and Angola, and straight away they're just like, there's boom sticks in the country. So you do see large tracks if you're reading like the book of Kearns and Gallo glass. You see these books come in, but right now, straight away they're right next to crossbows. So every guy who has a boom stick, they're straight away got these tracks to throw them straight into the crossbows and stuff when those malfunctions.
Right.
Because this is still something that's developing, and the crossbow is far superior. And you even see the Fitzgeralds adapting with the longbows in the country and stuff. So it's not a case of, I know people have this idea that the boom stick comes in and then the fact that just
right, it's gone.
Like that's not actually the reality.
No, it's definitely a process because, as you said, I mean, the handguns in this period, hand cannons, are not easy to use. They're unreliable. Reloading them is not a quick process. You can reload a crossbow way faster than you can reload a handgun in this era. But there's a like, we're segueing into firearms, I guess. The big advantage, tactical advantage of firearms, the early firearms, is the psychological aspect, right? It is even Bacon notes in the early 14th century, like the 1330s or 1340s, he notes that the cacophony caused by the explosion of firearms is deleterious to people's mental health, basically.
Yes.
That it just causes terror.
And the Kurds use that to their full advantage, because you can imagine a tree has just broken. That's right in front of you. It's right in front of your whole entire military. And then you suddenly hear all the banging off. Bang, 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 bang.
Right.
You've never heard of this before. The horse panics. The night is knocked off. And then suddenly all the crossbows come in, hitting everything. And then suddenly the Kurds are on top of you.
Right.
And they're decapitating people. So it's that initial shock that the Kurds, remember, the Kurds don't really use armor compared to the Galagos. Galagos are very armor oriented. Kurds do not have armor. So it's that fear that suddenly the Kurds bring in. And so you can see why the Kurds like the bang of the guns so much. So definitely, I definitely say Ireland would definitely agree with the fear aspect towards their enemies.
So there's actually a comment about shipbuilding, about sextants. How much have sextants changed from medieval times to, say, the Civil War in the 1860s? And why were Turkish ships under the Ottomans so, oh gosh, that word is covered by a heart that I can't get to, maybe if I rotate my phone. There we go. So effective as war machines. Sextants. As far as I understand, and Philip, if you know more, I remember reading recently that the sextant actually hasn't changed in any significant way since the Arabs designed it, basically, because it's basically a perfect instrument as it is for what it does. That's.
To be honest with you, I'm completely unaware of both questions. To be honest, you're way out of my field of expertise. Even the second one, why were Turkish ships under Ottomans so effective as war machines? We did have the Berbers. To be honest with you, maybe I should actually read up on that, because we were just talking about Grace O'Malley, and Grace O'Malley was actually fighting the Berber pirates and other Irish clansmen who'd taken up piracy with the development of ships and stuff. Were fighting Berber pirates. That's just part of the routine. But you also have Berber pirates who go into villages in Ireland and just simply rounding up as many people as you could. So those clans people, not only were they committing piracy and probably got involved in tit for tat against Berbers, Northern Irish, but they also had to protect their villages against Berber pirates and stuff. So yeah, I definitely need to actually read up on that. I think that's definitely a weakness in my reading of literature and stuff, and I definitely need to catch up on that now.
Yeah, as for the Ottoman warships, I'm actually not certain why. I'm going to posit, knowing what I know about the Ottoman Empire in this era, that it might have been a question of superior resources to produce powerful ships, right? Because the Ottoman Empire, by the time you're getting into the 16th century, is just this superpower in Europe, and all of Europe is kind of worried that they're going to soon be part of it. Like we from the point of now, we're like, oh, okay, the Ottoman Empire, whatever, it was there, it rose to prominence, and then it kind of started dying away after the Battle of Lepanto. But in the 16th century, there was no knowledge that was going to be the outcome. So, meaning the Ottoman Empire was just that powerful. So I almost think it's a question of having the infrastructure, the organization, the resources, because they're at the crossroads of trade, and they've got a stranglehold on trade, by the way, that they are able to make these warships that are just that superior. And it's not until the Europeans coagulate their feces and, for the Battle of Lepanto and actually turn the tide, it takes that long for Europe to kind of form a union that can actually withstand the kind of organization and structure that the Ottoman Empire have. I think that probably has more to do with it than actual technology. But again, I'm happy to be corrected in the comments.
I'd be more than happy to be corrected or be given more information, because from what I'm aware of, in the 16th century, we'll suddenly have the Berber pirates coming in to Ireland and stealing people from villages.
Right.
And you do actually have the likes of Grace O'Malley and other overvalued and stuff. And I'm also aware of as well the armor military ships, a lot of them coming into France during the Italian Wars and casually meeting up with the King of France and having a real chat with him as if going completely around the Holy Roman Empire. And especially with the Venetians trying to find them and stuff as well. So I mean, it's really, really important. So any information would be really,
Wow,
these
really
we
interesting.
find that into comment section or partner.
I always like more knowledge, so yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, firearms in general are a real game changer because in many ways they're an equalizer, right? They're a social equalizer. Before firearms in Europe, you've got to have a horse to be a powerful warrior, right? You just have to. It's if you have a horse, you have the advantage, and you know there's that. But now suddenly, actually having a horse might not be so great when there's firearms going off around you. So you know what people of course imagine when you say handgun. This is not what they usually imagine, right? But this is what a handgun looked like, handgun, because with the aid of a stick, a support, a crutch, basically, you could use it with a hand.
It's absolutely fascinating. Like, you see, from my perspective, it's the fact that we're at the same time having the Gaelic resurgence in Ireland with our cameras, and as I was saying, he's stealing all of his from the English and using it against them. And then we go into the period of the Talbot Ireland War between 1420 up to 1444, where once again the Anglo-Irish are both trading with Alberta and Florence and bringing this stuff in.
Right.
They're also just stealing it from the English and using it against them. So this is absolutely fascinating for me, especially when you read the report quotes from the back of Queens and Canada's.
Yeah, it's kind of scary reading the reports on these things, but you know this is what handguns look like, right? So, you know, this is actually whatever this if this I guess this is probably from the second game, or is this from Kingdom Come Deliverance?
This is in the second game. It was actually one of the huge complaints is that there wasn't guns in the first game.
Right.
It was down to the fact that in the first game, you're dealing with an independent group of game developers who are underfunded.
Right.
Because they made so much money in going into the first game, at the end of the first game, because they made so much money, they're not able to hire people in. And also on top of that, companies and their partners that are giving Kingdom Come, the developers of Kingdom Come Warriors, still money because they can say, oh, well, developers produce money.
Right.
We're invested
Yeah.
in that. So they're going to get the team together to actually develop the mechanics, because I know it doesn't seem like much to us, but they haven't developed some get somebody who could do the I think they call it merging frames and merging movements and somebody actually firing.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Compared to sword movements and stuff where there's a bit of mechanics to it,
Yeah.
There's way more from what I was told. There's way more to do with gun and stuff.
I mean, yeah, you can
just trying a sword.
right. You can see it. I mean, you can see it here. Like you've got you've got to prop it. You've got your match. That's not the word for it, but the fuse, right? You've got your fuse, which you've got to get through that little hole, and yeah. So it's what you kind of actually see is happening here. So it's a process, and also you know if you don't know what a handgun actually was, then you're going to get it completely wrong. But one of the innovations that happens in this era is the matchlock, actually, which really changes because otherwise, before the matchlock, this is what you had to do. Yeah, you had to do that, and then the matchlock, which this is a 16th century version, but it's very similar. I've been given to understand to the 15th century serpentine matchlock. You know, this really changes the game and allows you to keep like your burning fuse there, and once it's ignited for the shot, it pulls away, so it's not just constantly resetting it, so you don't have to have this in your hand. this burning stick basically. So yeah, matchlocks really changed the game, but what super changes the game, and I didn't make it in here somehow, is corning of gunpowder. So You've heard the term corning probably in context with beef, right? Corned beef, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Do you know what when we talk about the corning process for gunpowder? Are you familiar with that at all? At all?
No, not whatsoever. I should do it because it's popped up in the recent book that came out a few months back of Crimes and Galaxies where they actually studied all this stuff. So yeah, I should speed up on that.
So corning it's innovated in the late 14th century and it revolutionizes gunpowder. So obviously, maybe not obviously, there's debates about whether gunpowder was brought in from the East from China or whether it was a parallel development. The composition of gunpowder in Europe is different from the composition, not entirely, but different enough from the composition of gunpowder in China. Guns were not invented in Europe, by the way. Everyone, there's this weird myth going around, well, yes, they had fireworks, but they didn't actually use them for weapons. It was the Europeans who weaponized gunpowder.
Yeah, it's funny, I actually read that as well. But I read the English invented it, no?
Yeah, no. So the Koreans, the Goryeo dynasty had guns in the 13th, 14th century. The Chinese had them in the 14th century. It's definitely at the very least a parallel development thing. It's like, oh, this thing makes boom boom. What can we do with that that's more than just pretty?
Especially towards the Irish. During the Troubles, the war between Ireland and England up in the North of Ireland between 1969 to 1998, the Irish looked at fireworks and went, how can we use this in the war? So yeah, the Irish definitely looked at the boom stick and went, how can we use this? Actually, that's why fireworks are banned in Ireland. You can buy them in England, you can buy them in America, but they're actually banned in Ireland because the Irish like to use them against the military and police forces.
Yeah, I can see that. So, apparently that's just human nature. Like, it's pretty. How can we make it be violent and pretty? So the corning process. So gunpowder is not it's not a mixture like we think of. It's not a chemical compound. Actually, it's a mixture, which means that its components are just mixed together, kind of like when you're making a cake and you mix your flour and your sugar and your salt. That doesn't become a compound. Those things are still there, mixed together, but still individual and separate. Gunpowder was the same way. But the corning process, you take your gunpowder ingredients and you mix it in a liquid. And the liquid actually, you make it into a paste, and the liquid actually binds it together. And then the actual corning process, it's called corning because corn is the medieval English word for grain, not just maize, right? And you would actually take this paste and you would pass it, either manually make corn-sized, grain-sized pieces, or you would pass it through a sieve to make grain-sized pieces, corn-sized pieces. So that is your corned gunpowder. And apparently that size, the corn size, was massively super efficient. It was just the right amount of surface area to airflow, and then of course it was evenly sized and it was evenly mixed. And so it created a much more reliable, much more powerful gunpowder that was apparently, depending on the mixture they were using, 30% to 300% more powerful than uncorned gunpowder.
That's absolutely fascinating.
So it's a question, and that is invented, that comes around after the Black Death. So you've got the invention of this, the hand cannons, and then you've got this technological innovation on gunpowder, and you combine that, and then you get the Hussite Wars. And the Hussites, they make massive use of that combination.
It's all coming together now.
Right? Yeah. So that brings us to Kingdom Come Deliverance. The Hussite War, in essence, the Hussite Wars are a popular movement, right? It's a rebellion. It's a populist rebellion, and it's not the first one where guns were used. Wat Tyler's rebellion, they also used handguns.
I did not know that.
They're already becoming the equalizer, right? It's already the tool that a much less trained person can use. Knights take years and years of training to create, right? It takes literally decades to attain that kind of mastery of arms, of sword, of any kind of non-firearm. right? But these handguns, you don't need any of that.
Yeah. Just put it together with whack. You've got yourself knocked down.
Exactly, and even if they're not knocked down, they're disoriented because of the explosive sounds. There's fire, there's smoke. It just creates this massive advantage. And horses, do you ride?
Yeah.
Do you ride at all?
I don't ride at all, but I'm fully aware of the abhorrent effect it has on the horse. It's suddenly confused and decides it's going to knock the rider off.
Yeah, I've been riding for many, many years, and whenever I used to train at a place that was right next to a pretty major road, and occasionally an engine would backfire. Gone. Horse is gone. Full gallop, gone. So, I mean, there are obviously ways to train horses for that, but that's not always going to work. And especially in this early age of firearm use, I'm confident that not all horses are trained to deal with it. So yeah, so firearms, and apparently firearms were already common enough in Italy in the 1340s that Petrarca comments that firearms are just as common on the battlefield as any other kind of weapon. That's what Petrarch says in the 1340s. So
1340s. Yeah, I was looking at the occurrence in Gallograss, and there's a lot of firearms on the field, and especially if you're dealing with the currents and stuff, where their ultimate goal is to knock someone, especially a knight, off of his horse,
right,
and then suddenly get on top of him and start disemboweling him. The gun will come in very, very handy to do that. So yeah, even in Ireland, I can see easily the effects that these guns would have had been brought into the country. Although they still argue, did Ireland have smiths of their own? I can't see any evidence of the Irish making their own guns. They seem to be, importing them from Iberia and Florence, which goes to show, how many guns did Iberia and Florence have if they were giving it off to the Irish to go and fight the English?
Well, thank you for that segue, because we didn't plan this, people. This happened naturally. Actually, Florence was one of the earliest centers of gun production in Europe.
Yeah. And I wonder who's allied to them.
Yeah, and and we're talking about early 14th century. Florence jumps on that industry as soon as possible. So they're one of the earliest and primary manufacturers of guns. One of the things I read about guns, and this made sense, is that unlike other weapons, which can maybe be homemade, the technology required to make guns requires a level of organization and a level of funding that actually is not easy for an individual to achieve. So guns actually start to help foment the nationalization of kingdoms, because it requires, a powerful, well-organized government to mass produce them, to coordinate their mass production. Which is why when you said that, Ireland's not making them, they're importing them. Exactly. You can't. Not anyone can just go into their smithy and cast a handgun.
Yeah. That's fascinating. It just all suddenly clicked the right places. We should see the arrival of who we call in the Irish literature, and you'll easily correct this into its correct Florence literature, a person called John of the Geraldini, who's from Florence. He suddenly appears, and magically there's shipments coming into the country.
Right. Smart man. And of course, as soon as you have a new technology, we want to make it even newer. So there were all kinds of crazy ideas for improved weapons, improved handguns. So here on the left is a fun one. This is a bellows gun. And you can actually see the bellow. And it was actually, the idea was, you could fire 4 of them at once by just pulling out the bellows stop and, vroom. Now, how effective that was, I wasn't able to find any evidence of. God knows, I have never seen a bellows gun in any illumination being used. So I don't know if it's just one of those inventions that briefly existed, that maybe some inventor tried to sell at some court and it never really took off, like so many of Da Vinci's war machines. But we're getting they're getting really and Da Vinci got super crazy with firearms. I should have included some of his crazy.
Yeah.
he was someone that was definitely influenced by the Hussite Wars. Because especially if you look at his tank and stuff, and you look at the wagon warfare, you're like, oh yeah, he definitely liked the Hussite Wars, especially for the innovations that was going on there.
Well, and especially because most of the imagery we have of the Hussite Wars, this is going to surprise you, but mostly chroniclers don't get their chronicles illuminated during the historical event. They get illuminated 20, 30, 40 years after the historical event. So, most of, I mean, the chronicle is written, but the actual process of illuminating it and refining it and all of that happens afterwards. So most medieval chronicles, if they have imagery, if they're illuminated like this, they are post factum. They are well after the event, so they're not necessarily depicting things as they were in 1419. They are depicting them as the artist thought they looked probably 30 years after the fact.
That's going to be very interesting to people's interpretation for sure.
Right? So Da Vinci, the point of that is that a lot of the chronicles of the Hussite Wars are being copied and illuminated in Da Vinci's youth. So it is entirely possible that he is actually because he's actually working in great Florentine households, so he has access to these libraries with these latest and greatest chronicles. So it is entirely possible that he may have actually seen one of the chronicles of the Hussite Wars with their illustrations like this, with their illuminations. But again, those illuminations probably don't reflect what it actually looked like in 1419. They probably reflect what the artist thinks it looked like in 1419. Or whenever. Not always.
That is literally just putting all the pieces together. It's just very, very interesting. Even if we're completely off target, it's still very tantalizing imagination going on there.
Right. So that brings us to our wagons, right? The wagon forts, which are really revolutionary for Europe in this time. It's not that they're the first people to have ever used a wagon fort, the Hussites, but they're the first ones to do it in a long time in Europe. What do you know about their Wagenburg, as they're called in German, the wagon forts?
The wagon forts, well, it completely revolutionizes a lot of the warfare that's happening, especially on the eastern side of the world. They are wagons that basically, the Hussites, the majority of them are not made up of the noble classes, from what I understand. They're made up of the much more lower classes, but they do have a general who's an absolute genius, who many of the Kingdom Come fan base have known as the guy with the one eye, because not everybody's aware of who this character is yet. So for the time being, if anybody from the Kingdom Come community is in here, we'll just call him the man with the one eye. We won't ruin or spoil anything
for the fans,
but I think Rachel knows who the man with the one eye is. But this man, if people are into spoilers and stuff, if you want zero spoilers whatsoever, maybe it's a good time to probably leave. I don't want you to leave because we don't want you to
leave.
But at the same time, this man with the one eye kind of revolutionizes warfare in real life, but possibly in the game as well, because we have seen images of him appearing in the background and stuff, talking to our protagonist, Henry, and he comes up with this entire revolution of wagon warfare, and he decides to get all the wagons together with the lower class peasants and gives them a whole lot of crossbows and guns, and as the noble classes of Hungary, as we see with King Sigurd, arrives, perhaps they'll come down and take on the man with the one eye and our main protagonist Henry, and they fire a shot at them, and eventually as they get too close, as you can see in the depiction of the picture as well, they also have weapons to further break them up, as they kind of tap into the wagons itself. And the wagons itself take the main blow of the counter charge onto them. That's my interpretation so far, anyway.
That's what having read up on them, that's what I understand too. Of course, in this illumination on right, obviously it's stylized because they have a limited amount of space. The wagon forts were actually bigger than that. It wasn't just like 4 little wagons. It was more wagons because there was cavalry waiting on the inside of this wagon fort, so that once either the wagon, once they had actually, basically created enough chaos on the outside, the riders would be sent out to finish it off, or if the people, basically laying siege, attacking the wagon fort broke in, the knights would be, whether they were actually knights or not is a different question, but the mounted warriors would be waiting to then, fight off the knights who would still be mounted. Yeah, but my understanding, what I read, there was a primary source I read, and I meant to get that quote because it was interesting. The picture on the left is actually very close to what the primary source described them as being, linked together by chains. What they don't have, at least I don't see, apparently in the gaps between the wagons, they would actually put brambles, really nasty bramble bushes, to prevent anyone from trying to just slip through. But they didn't include that in this illumination. But what is interesting is if you look on the left of the illumination, on the left side of the wagon fort, there's that flail, and that is a peasant's weapon, right? That is 100% a flail for a thresher that has been weaponized to be used against mounted warriors, against knights. So.
Oh, that's got it. It makes me more and more excited for when the video game comes out, Kingdom Come, and we finally get to see this wagon warfare. Hopefully, Kingdom Come 2, but there's a lot of teasers that might just actually happen in Kingdom Come 2 that we might see a sudden speed of time from 1403 to 1419.
Yeah, we really would have to, because first Jan Hus has to get executed by being betrayed by Sigismund. And then that still takes some time from that to actually foment and to full out into the actual rebellion that breaks out. So yeah, it's there's this feeling for a lot of players. I read that, well, Kingdom Come Deliverance, that's the Hussite Wars. It's like, it isn't actually, not yet. It's
not quite yet.
It's
still having King Sigmund drumming silver mines and stuff.
Right, you've got Jan Hus, and he's in Prague as the canon of the cathedral, preaching the word of John Wycliffe, and talking about the corruption of the church and how good it would be to go back to a Jesus-like society that's egalitarian, and how you don't need priests to interpret the word of God for you, and all that sort of stuff. But that's not the Hussite Wars, that's Hus. So that basically brings us to the end of our innovation. But Ryan found this, or I think Ryan found this, or maybe you sent this? I don't know.
You sent it.
Oh, you sent this. Yeah, it was you. Yeah, but this was interesting because it shows the division line. On the right half is the actual thing. In real life, there's a real person there. And then on the left is apparently how it looks in the game. And that's pretty amazing. But I want to ask.
I like how they show the treadwheel.
Yeah, there's actually a treadwheel crane at the top on the left, which is cool because that's another medieval innovation. But what I wondered about is why does the part on the left look as old as the part on the right, when the part on the right is the modern world? Shouldn't it look new and shiny, and like there should be like fresh plaster, and it shouldn't look old and rickety already?
Oh God, I was about to give them a praise in the back, but now that you say that, I'm kind of like, oh no.
It should.
Yeah, I mean, it could be plastering.
It already looks old. It shouldn't look old. Anyway, that's the problem is that people go to historic places and they assume that the way it's not. I don't mean that they wake up and say I'm going to misunderstand this, but the natural assumption is, yeah, this is how it looked in the Middle Ages. But most 99% of medieval buildings you encounter in Europe will not look like they did in the Middle Ages. They're worn down.
It's a huge problem we're having with Chat GPT right now when it comes down to English and Irish. So you type into Chat GPT, can you make a casual for the medieval period? And instead of doing murder who was a casual in the medieval period, it'll just show the ruins of casual. I think it was History Hit have a whole episode on Chat GPT and how they wanted to make Lindisfarne look like Lindisfarne again, and it kept showing the ruins of Lindisfarne in the modern day. So even Chat GPT right now is having huge problems understanding the fact that it looks different in the medieval period.
Well, I actually the problem is when you do an internet search now, it automatically gives you the AI response, which, by the way, everyone, is almost always wrong. Do not trust that AI result. It is not correct. Do not think it is. Go past it. Please don't be lazy.
It doesn't have the problem I'm having. Me and you were experimenting yesterday with tower houses. Now, the photos with the actual descriptions
Right,
and stuff.
yeah.
And it keeps taking it from a murder perspective. Right? Take that image. You're dealing with something that has the intelligence that we do. You're dealing with a decision machine. So the decision machine will always take it from a murder. It cannot, there's no way, unless it actually gets actual advanced AI, this AI that we're dealing with at this time being will never be able to understand the difference between a medical code and murder code.
Yep.
That's the problem we're facing right now, especially as historians. And we can say the same thing. Every single time we come across a script that's been written, we know straight away that this is a chat GPT script, because straight away the process is talking from a murder perspective. They'll use the word country, but the chat GPT does not understand the concept of law against country. It
Nope.
does not understand that. It doesn't understand
Nope.
any of the medical concepts, because it's a decision machine. It's great and it's quickly serenade this script. I've done it a few times and it's huge time saver. But when it comes down to actually putting the script down, it cannot do it because it keeps looking at it from a murder perspective. And it actually, for me, I've thought it was a waste of time. You're better off actually just continuing to learn the script.
Yeah,
Of actually putting the script together yourself, before putting it together for a medical script.
yeah. I've never ever used ChatGPT for anything. Not for imagery, not for scripts. I wouldn't trust it. I mean, after that lawyer got disbarred in the U.S. for using a ChatGPT brief to the Supreme Court, and it just made up precedents.
Yeah, it's another one. Law firms, you cannot put ChatGPT. Once again, it's a decision-making machine. It is not an emotion machine. It does not understand the type of emotions that we put into laws. It will never be able to understand that. And there are a lot of people who say, "Oh, but you have a program that can listen to robots to leave." That's because it's part of its decision-making. They have the decision to leave or stay, and it took the decision to leave. However, if you were to ask a robot, okay, you're going to start a revolution, it could just choose to have a revolution, but it wouldn't understand why it's having a revolution. Because it's for the time being, unless you have more advanced AI, it's a decision machine. So once again, when it comes down to putting together buildings of that code, it doesn't understand why you were put together a building of the medical code. Because to be honest with you, it's because we're stupid.
Well, I mean, yeah. So it's exactly right. So the problem, like, if you look up why did oil painting become prominent in the 15th century? Okay. The artificial intelligence is going to return a result that is based on what is out there. It basically aggregates websites, right? It aggregates search results into a cohesive unit, but that doesn't make it correct because those websites might not be correct. So there's no guarantee that the information that the ChatGPT or any artificial intelligence is using as its basis is correct. So yeah, that's why I always try to find a primary source. When I find any piece of information, I try to trace it back to a primary source, because otherwise it's just as likely to be incorrect. And God knows if it's ChatGPT.
Most of the good 80% of the time, you just have to keep in mind that it's taking it from a moral. It's like getting your radical nationalist friend to give you an answer. That's exactly what it's taking it from a very moral point of view. So if your radical nationalist friend turned around and says, okay, let's talk about the Irish, it's going to say the English, and that's exactly what ChatGPT wrote. And then if you look at the draw that is in your Irish society, then it's actually between the Gaelic world and the English world. It just doesn't understand these factors. It's a decision-making machine.
Yeah.
So therefore, very much in ChatGPT, it's a funny creature.
No, you just can't trust that it's actually giving you correct information at all. I mean, in that case of the Supreme Court brief, it invented case law. ChatGPT invented case law and included it in the letter like it was historical fact. So, and the guy wasn't clever enough to check it, I guess.
And it's even more dangerous when it comes down to law, because there only is its historical arc, perhaps, but it also is lacking a lot of emotion.
Yeah, it has.
How our society functions.
Yeah, it has no idea about manipulation and the persuasive argument. That's the word I was looking for, not manipulation.
So very, 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 very dangerous to undermining our own society. There's way too many people looking at our society from a very black and white point of view because money talks.
Right.
So there's way too much of black and white situation. We need to start stripping back the lies about that and start putting back emotions again so people can function.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, so that is the end of our discussion on innovation and rebellion as it pertains to the world of Kingdom Come Deliverance. I'm definitely excited to see what the next game has to offer in terms of material culture and historical accuracy. So that's going to be very interesting. Some of the stills I've seen have been both an improvement and, as they say in German, a Verschlimmbesserung, which means they made it worse by improving it. Oh yeah. Oh, some of the women I've seen are making me go, oh no, oh no, just no.
Oh God! Now I'm excited to see what your criticism will be afterwards. Maybe because the game is out. I think it's on Tuesday or Wednesday for my stuff.
Right. Yeah.
We probably won't have time to fully digest what's inside the game until about the end of the month.
Right.
But we'll definitely 100% look at the clothing. Because I'm going to be live streaming pretty much every single day of Kingdom Come 2. I'm already doing it for Kingdom Come 1. And I have to thank everybody, especially from Rachel stream the clothing and then I'll chat with me. Thanks guys for that. And definitely keep coming in. We'll definitely be having a laugh and criticizing what's going on and all the bad stuff that Henry keeps doing. And I noticed I sent this to Rachel and no one else has seen this yet. Unless you've been watching the trailers, but the trailer dropped yesterday about punishments. And it's so funny because the day before, and there was a few people from Rachel's channel who were joining me for that one, but Henry got food. So Henry decided that it would be a good idea to break into someone's home and grab their food, in particular their sausages. And so, yesterday was such a good time, and I said to Rachel, well, if Henry decides he's going to commit murder and steal from people, there's going to be very harsh punishments for Henry in the second game. What did you think of that, Rachel?
That's I mean, it's pretty accurate. The early 15th century crime and punishment is a pretty severe topic. In fact, I mentioned it in my in-depth review on Lady Stephanie's ensemble. Theft could result in having an eye put out or both eyes put out, losing your hand, or just being hanged. So yeah.
I saw that Henry, who in the trailer was branded, he was tortured, and eventually, as you said there, he was hung. And I don't want Henry to be using eyebrows as well. So that's going to be the future for me. Maybe in the future, maybe Henry wouldn't be breaking into people's homes to go and steal food and sausages.
Right. Yeah. Maybe not. Yeah. Maybe we should do a live stream on medieval crime and punishment in this era. I think. That's pretty gruesome. Yeah, medieval. There was a lot of beauty about medieval society, and there were also some really horrific things. So. The wheel's pretty gruesome. Definitely.
Especially since now it's going to be really important, and the shock value people are going to have this week when they try to suddenly make it to be this home like myself. Punishments are waiting for us.
Yeah, the only living thief is a good thief. I'll put it that way. Okay, guys. So Any last questions before we part ways on our Sunday/Saturday, depending on your hemisphere and time zone? Coming up, Philip, as he said, is going to be live streaming. He's going to continue live streaming, playing Kingdom Come Deliverance, and then once the new one comes out, you can tune in on his channel for flailing about the new world and exploring it. On my channel, I've got an in-depth review of Lady Stephanie's clothing and some of the other characters' clothing with lots of historical references and new information I discovered about Bohemian fashion in this era. Fascinating stuff.
Nice.
And I did a postmortem on someone put it away, my new Florentine Italian gown. That's going to get posted tomorrow, or today. Sorry, today. Today is Sunday. Yes. Today. And Philip is posting, has it already gone public, the Tower House video?
No, we're working away on that. It was going to go live last night, but myself and the wife, we were discussing eating sushi. You came up with the first thing tomorrow morning, and from an archaeology point of view, from a historical point of view, it's not too bad, but from an archaeology point of view, no way, Jose. So we're taking it apart, and we're going to put it together again. So hopefully it should be out sometime today, Sunday morning, for my friends and family back at home. So that will be out this weekend. So that's the Irish Tower Houses. Basically all the main features that go into the Irish Tower House. So that will be out this weekend. Definitely if you're into 15th century Morocco, especially the impact that cannons have. You see these scenes, you can see here, this is a good example of an Irish Tower House. You start seeing these peppered all over the country. At the same time you see foreplate armour starting to come into the country. You start to see guns coming into the country. So all the impacts that you see with Kingdom Come are impacting Ireland as well, as you see this beautiful Irish Tower House built by the Bubonic Plague. Also with the frame as well, the woman as well, the same colour as well with the clothes and the shawl over her head. I can't remember her name right now. But yeah, very exciting time.
Shinron? Is that the Shinron woman?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, she has an amazing, for what it is, an amazingly well-preserved dress. Yeah. Oh, I see. Okay, well, I don't see any other comments. There are technically 5 people watching. Hopefully they're still awake. Well, thank you, Philip, for another fantastic early Sunday morning here in Asia, and I'm excited for our future collaborations. We've got some fun stuff lined up, everyone.
Nice.
So everyone, have a nice day, and if you haven't yet checked out Irish Medieval History, that's Philip's channel, please do that, and subscribe, and check out his videos, and join in the live streams and just heckle him. It's fun.
It is definitely fun. And thanks very much for watching for having me on today. Hopefully we'll have you over my channel next week.
I hope so.
Some punishments, and this seems to be a good way to get over there. We'll see what we can do anyway. And as always, guys, thanks very much.
Okay, bye everyone.
Bye.